I'll stand over here, do your roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Commissioner Baskerville.
Present.
Commissioner Blunt Carter.
Present.
Commissioner Cade.
Present.
Commissioner Evans.
Present.
Commissioner Holmes.
Present.
Commissioner Ingram.
Present.
Commissioner Johnson.
Present.
Commissioner Lassiter.
Present.
Commissioner Lawston.
Present.
Commissioner Mitchell.
Present.
Commissioner Nesbitt.
Present.
Commissioner Peace.
Present.
Commissioner Richmond.
Present.
Commissioner Smith.
Present.
Commissioner Thompson.
Present.
Commissioner Wiley.
Present.
Wonderful, wonderful. And do we have the chair joining us as of yet? Okay, and with that, we are going to proceed. We are having a bit of a tech issue with the chair. But with that, I feel like he needs no introduction. But I'd like to just give a bit of an introduction. So we are just so happy that Secretary Cardona was able to carve out some time in his busy schedule to join us and bring greetings and just check in with the commission here. And so, as Secretary of Education, as many of you know, because you certainly know him, has a very distinguished career as an elementary school teacher, principal, district administrator, and Connecticut Education Commissioner. He is a firm believer that being an educator isn't just a job, it's an extension of your life's purpose. By way of some personal background, the secretary and his wife are the proud parents of 2 college students as we speak. So these issues are real and personal. And as many of you know, the secretary has had a leadership role in supporting our public schools, in advancing college affordability, and a slew of other policy areas. And so with that, and in the interest of time, please, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good to be here. Good to see everyone. I was looking at my agenda. I'm like, where's this meeting? And they said, it's in the room where it happens. So I guess this is the room where it happens. Look, I'll be brief because I know you have a very busy agenda and a lot of important work to focus on. My message today is very simple. It's twofold. Thank you. The time commitment to be on this advisory board, the compromise that it takes, not only on what you came in, you said I want to accomplish this, and then the greater good comes together with a report that I'm looking forward to reading, but also the compromise that you have to make with your spouses to say I'm not going to be there that day, or your kids. I get it, and I want to say thank you. What an important time to be in the role that you're in. So enough of that. Now we got to get to work because there's a lot at stake. So your role on this commission, your report, is critical given where we are in this country, given the challenges, the fact that things are being done now in the open that were once done in the shade. You know what I'm talking about. I have a feeling in this room we have some hip hop fans. Any hip hop fans here?
Yep.
All right. How about old school hip hop, like the 1900s hip hop? Black Sheep.
Yep.
You could get with
Yes.
this,
You can get with that.
or you could get with that. I want you to contextualize where we are as a country. You could get with this, or you could get with that. We have a team that's embracing diversity, that embraces being descendants of immigrants, and has a cabinet that looks like America. And then you have another side that's screaming, immigrants poison the blood of our country. You could get with this, or you could get with that. We have a group that is trying to increase affordability, equal outcomes in our education system. And you have a group that is denouncing diversity, equity, and inclusion. a group that is attacking affirmative action. And I don't have to tell you what the most recent reports this week showed, that the diversity in some of our Ivy Leagues is down. This or that. We have a team that's fighting to level the playing field in higher education, where one of the things that stuck with me when I was getting ready for a hearing for this job is that Black borrowers, on average, owe more 12 years later than when they took the loan. Black borrowers have to borrow close to the total percentage of the college education because, in many cases, they don't have that wealth. So when we have a broken system, it affects Black borrowers more than most. So we have a team that's looking to address runaway interest, a team that's running to tell public servants that, if you choose public service, we're going to get rid of your debt. And then you have another side that's suing every decision that's made, even though their own constituents are going to be left with the debt. I We have a team, and this is it. I could go on all day, but you got a busy day. We got a team that's putting in $28 million for teacher quality grants this week to make sure teachers have the professional development that they need to work with our students. We have a team that's proposing Title I increases to make sure that there are enough reading teachers in every classroom. IDEA increases to make sure special education services are being given. And you got a team that wants to shut down the department, cut Title I, cut SPED funding. It's that simple. This or that. So when I say that your work is important at the top of my remarks, I mean that. To borrow a line from the president, it's not hyperbole. This is a very consequential time for you to be in your roles. That report is going to carry more weight than you even know. We need to. I know you're going to be working on that today, and I'm looking forward to reading it. We need to carry that and say, this is what we represent. There's a lot at stake. And like you, I feel blessed that I was called to serve in this administration like you are, at a time where our kids need us the most, where the racial gaps are going to get worse if we don't step in, where the opportunity gaps are going to get worse if we don't get in, where the racial wealth gaps are going to increase if we don't jump in. And that's the role that you have. You advise the president. And for that, I want to say thank you. I wish you success today. And I want to say thank Alexis, Courtney, and the whole team. Alexis is a thought partner for me. There's no decision that impacts the Black community that I don't have her in my ear, or it's an open door for her. If there's something that she feels I need to hear to make sure that impacts the Black community, she has access, and she's been phenomenal. A great thought partner, a really committed member of this team, the Biden-Harris team. So I want to say thank you to you, to Courtney, to your entire team. And thank you all. Enjoy your day. I know you're going to get a lot done. I look forward to reading the report. Thank you.
And now we're going to take a quick photo with Commissioners and Secretary Cardona. Thank you. So let's make sure that our tech is working and our chair is joining us.
Okay, I can hear you all. Can you hear me?
All right.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. All right. So, Mr. Chairman, it's good to hear your voice, and I think we'll see you shortly. And so we do have another special guest joining us this morning momentarily. But when she arrives, Mr. Chair, we'll turn it over to you. But in the meantime, did you want to greet the commission?
So first and foremost, I just want to say thank you and give my apologies for not being there. Obviously, there's something important happening in Philadelphia today, and so we're pulled in all directions. But that being said, I really just want to start this meeting where I started our first meeting to say that we were going to do this work with what Bell Hooks called a love ethic, focused on making sure this administration, the next administration, this country sees, respects, and is focused on an agenda that lifts up Black folks, addressing the systematic issues that have made life far too difficult for people just trying to be treated with the fairness that every single person deserves. And when I look at the policy papers that we put together, I just have so much pride for what this team has accomplished. And so I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, and also thank Marla for stepping in today to be to help chair the meeting. She's tough, so I know she's gonna keep everybody right on track the way that I would if I were there with you in person. So I just do wanna thank you. I look forward to our vote on these recommendations later today for the further conversation, and obviously I'll be moderating the last panel, and then of course. Can we just thank one more time, and we will 1,000 more times before it's over, Alexis, Courtney, Monique, Salome, Chase, tech team, everybody who has helped make this work so easy. You all have been incredible to work with, and we are so grateful to have you be the tip of the spear as we advance these policy recommendations. And so I will stop there, sort of by way of intro remarks. And as soon as the Congresswoman is with us, I will introduce my friend briefly, and then turn it over to our chair for the day, Marla. After that, and so Alexis, you can just let me know whenever she arrives.
I think we're almost ready.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. Oh, excuse me. Mr. Chairman, were you speaking just now?
No,
Or
no, I'm just waiting for you to tell me when she's in the room.
okay, I think she is on her way, but we also have Kylie from the White House
Oh, great. Okay.
DPC joining us. So why don't we go to Kylie?
Perfect.
Well, good morning. Am I heard?
Yes.
Okay, well, good morning. My name is Kylie Patterson. I'm the Deputy Assistant to the President for Racial Justice and Equity, and I want to say thank you so much for this invitation today. We are, as the Secretary already mentioned, busy and laser focused on ensuring that everyone has an equal opportunity in our democracy. I'm going to highlight some of our work we've done around educational access and economic opportunities, but I also want to ensure and encourage you all to continue your good work. To be clear, part of our commitment to equity is making sure that we open up opportunities to hear from everyone on the best policy approaches possible. We know that we do not have all of all the ideas, all of the items that are so pressing and important to the American public. And so we rely on a commission like yours to raise that to the president and to his senior advisors to make sure we can deliver. So I want to say thank you once more. So we've been so focused since the pandemic to ensure that the recovery for the African American community would be robust. And in fact, we have overseen the most robust recovery one would expect for the Black community. Not only have we seen the lowest level of Black unemployment during this administration, we've also seen significant increases in income as well as wealth. Now, that's because we've seen these increases in wealth. For instance, we also, and it's at the lowest level, the gap between Black and white families. We know there's still a lot more work to do. And when we talk about that work, it includes home ownership and housing. Uh, we have allocated additional funds to the pro housing work to make sure that we are able to produce more supply. We continue to work with our Department of Housing and Urban Development to identify housing counseling and other first time home buyer programs and facilitate and encourage more first time home buyers and Black home buyers to participate in home ownership. But what we've noticed and what we've noted is that one of the greatest challenges is that you can be in the same 5 bedroom or 4 bedroom or 3 bedroom home in effectively the same community. But if the owner was Black and the other owner was white, the value of those homes was dramatically different. And this is unacceptable. This is untenable. And this is a real challenge when we're trying to, again, address the Black white wealth gap. So with that, we launched the PAVE task force looking at appraisal bias. And what we found, number one, was that yes, there was strong appraisal bias. But what's most important, I think most exciting for this conversation, is that we have been able to reduce the instances of that appraisal bias by 40%. And that's all been during this administration, during the Biden Harris administration. But we're not finished yet, to be clear. But I want to make sure I share that opportunity with you or that work with you because it goes to show how we're looking at the entire continuum of wealth building for Black Americans. The other area that we look at, of course, is business ownership. There's some interesting data, and I'm sure many of you have seen it, that if all of the Black businesses mirrored all the white businesses with employees, there would be some number of additional $1 trillion in our GDP. But right now, there's a gap there when we talk about Black owned businesses with employees. So we're working on that and we're making sure we're working with our Small Business Administration to identify the gaps that's preventing those entrepreneurs from achieving that goal. And more often than not, it's around access to capital and access to contracts. So, what have we done on the access to capital front? Well, with the SBA, we have tripled lending to Black owned small businesses. Tripled. That is huge, right? We're talking about access to capital, making sure that folks can buy the necessary equipment, they can move into the right location, and begin to turn a profit and and contribute to their communities. On the other side is the number of contracts. I used to actually work with a number of small businesses, Black-owned small businesses in Baltimore. And if I were to tell them, here I have a loan, they would say that's great, but they would much prefer a contract. And we recognize that's important, and we have a role to play in the federal government as well. So President Biden set a goal to increase our federal government spending with small disadvantaged businesses by 50% over 2020. And I'm proud to say that we've done an incremental goal each year, and we've hit them every since. And this year, we intend to hit 13% federal government spending with Black-owned businesses. When we're talking about spending that type of money with Black-owned businesses, we're talking about 2024, FY 2024. That was 2023. That was $10 billion with Black-owned businesses. This is the type of economic injection, right? That can change a community, can change a family, change a generation. So I want to say I'm quite proud of this legacy and this work. But of course, we have to understand what more needs to be done. How can we continue to encourage more entrepreneurs to enter the space, the federal government space, as well as, of course, state and municipal contracting space? Also, breaking down barriers in the private sector. We understand there's been some, we have been at the center of a number of legal cases. There's a lot of politics around the good work of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. But what we know to be true is that our United States, our diversity is our strength, and that the private companies who recognize that will be best positioned for the economy of the future. And so we've continued that. We're committed to that as an administration. And in fact, we are fully committed to DEIA here in the administration. We are looking at our own employees. We're making sure that we're paying employees equitably for their work. We're not looking at their past pay to determine their current or their future pay, but we're instead looking at their qualifications. And these are the types of ways that you can develop a policy and process that leads to more equitable outcomes for all of us, and in particular for Black Americans. And then lastly, and I don't see anyone with a cane yet, but I think someone's going to come and yank me off the stage soon. But I do want to talk about our work of healthcare. We have been able to increase Black enrollment in the Affordable Care Act by 95%. That's over 1.7 million people covered with health coverage. And we know this is so significant because it is when you are challenged with a significant health crisis without coverage that your financial ability, the of course debt that may be incurred, can really disrupt forever your opportunity to build wealth as an individual and as a family. And so this 95% increase is a huge win for all of us, and in particular for those families. In addition, we've been able to lower premium costs by $800 for millions of Americans. And we've been able to cap out-of-pocket drug costs at $2,000 for people on Medicare starting in 2025. We've also capped the cost of insulin at $35 beginning in 2025. And most recently, and something that, again, we're very proud of, just this last month, we announced new negotiated prices for the first 10 prescription drugs selected for Medicare price negotiation. And we expect to save $1.5 billion in out-of-pocket expenses in the first year of the program alone. So this is the type of work that I think is indicative of our commitment to the full community. But there is something that's quite personal to me, and I want to share it with all of you. I went to a small school in a place called Bushkill, Pennsylvania. I'm sure you've all heard of it. But more importantly, my sister formed a fantastic relationship with a young man named Morgan. Morgan was the sweetest little boy. He had a smile that lit up the room, and Morgan had sickle cell. Morgan had a sickle cell crisis, and he passed away before he was 12 years old. I share that because we know that sickle cell is a disease, incredibly painful. It hits many communities, and it hits the African community in particular. Our administration has made sickle cell disease the first focus of the new Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services models to lower the high cost of drugs, promote accessibility to drug therapies, and improve patient care, including for many Black patients. What I like so much about this, I'm going to end my remarks here, is that the work of this administration is both powerful and personal. And I want to say thank you all, because I know it's powerful and personal for all of you as well. Thank you.
Ms. Patterson, I don't.
Oh, I'm still here. Sorry, everyone.
Okay, great. First of all, I just want to thank you for joining us and bringing greetings from the White House. And secondly, you ended on a personal note about sickle cell, and I too have a loved one who is battling and living with sickle cell, and I appreciate the work that you guys are doing on that issue, because we need a champion, and to know that the White House is there for families and for individuals that are battling that disease. It means a lot. So thank you for that. At this time, we're gonna open it up to other commissioners that may have a question, and we are going to start with my good friend Lonnie here.
You mentioned the 13% government spend, federal government spend with black-owned businesses. How does that number stack up historically?
So, what compared to FY 2020, the increase has been $800 million. So that's been an $800 million increase from FY 2020
I mean, I guess
for black businesses. Excuse me. I'm sorry.
as a result, the percentage, overall percentage of government spend, are we still? I mean, is 13% higher than we've been before, or is it lower, or is it about the same?
It is higher. It is higher. So uh, we began just around 10%, and every year of this administration, we've increased by 1% of our small disadvantaged business spending. So from 10 to 11 to 12 to 13 last fiscal year. Last fiscal year. This year, we're planning on getting, sorry, I'm getting all my numbers confused. Apologies. Uh, our goal for FY 2024, that's the current fiscal year that we're in, is 13%. We've been increasing it year over year. And then in 2025, the goal is 15% with small disadvantaged businesses.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, of course.
We do have one more question, but we're going to wait for one for more than 1 second. We're going to take the time to bring back Chairman Kenyatta so that he can introduce our next speaker. So, Ms. Patterson, if we could just wait for a few minutes, and then we will go. Okay. All right. Thank you. So, Ms. Patterson, we are actually going to receive this last question from Commissioner Evans, and then we will move to the chairman.
Thank you, Kylie, and good morning. Thank you for your leadership. I'm standing in between one of my 60 bosses, Congresswoman Crockett, so I will be fast. As you know, the CBC released yesterday our corporate accountability report talking about DEI in the country. I know the work of the administration. Can you tell this commission largely where we started on DEI at the beginning of the administration? Can you paint the landscape as President Biden leaves office, where we are, and more importantly, as this president leaves, what are the things that still need to be done after January 20th of next year? What is the
Certainly.
work that we still have to do?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Evans. Thank you. Number one, what I'll say is on day one of the Biden-Harris administration, President Biden released the executive order on equity, demonstrating the principal priority that equity would serve in his administration. This is the most diverse administration in America's history. I could speak at length about all of the various leaders, to include our Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, excuse me. But there's more that needs to be done. So there's representation, but then it follows with policy and procedure. And so you ask what more we can be doing. Here in the federal government, we're looking at every policy, every procedure, and asking how does this advance equity? How can we ensure that federal government programs are getting to everyone and there are not artificial barriers and other types of prohibitions? We're looking at language access, for instance. We're making sure that we're getting to communities. We're not just posting something to the website, but we're actually going to communities. In fact, I was just down in Mobile, Alabama, for instance, making sure that this information was getting to communities. That's number one and two of what we've been doing. But you asked the question around what more do we need to do? To be clear, this work, the work of creating a just society, an equal society for all of us, to include Black Americans, means that everyone needs to be included, including our corporate partners. Now, we have had the opportunity to speak to corporations here in the White House to share our priorities and what we think is the best way forward. But we also know, that this is really in the best business interest of corporations. The data is clear that diverse workforces, diverse executive leadership are able to look around the corner. They're able to prepare better. They're able to weather storms, and they're able to earn higher profits. And so, because of all of that, we're continuing in this work, and we are not asking any corporation to do something because of altruism. We're choosing instead to tell them that yes, it's the right thing to do, but it's a double bottom line, right? It's the right thing to do, and it's going to increase your bottom line. So that's what we're doing right now. Is a lot of communication around this, around ensuring that these corporations know it is a priority for us. One other area that we're doing, and area of work that I personally am very passionate about, is our good jobs work. Recently, there was an executive order on it, and part of that is that the expectation is all of these corporations, for-profit corporations who are receiving significant funds via the various CHIPS and Science Act, BIL, and so forth, IRA, that when they are producing jobs, that they're thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, that they're making sure that there are accessible pathways, that there's equitable pay, and that there's childcare provided. So that's some of the work that we're doing. But to be clear, there's so much more to do, and we know that that we need to keep our eye on the prize. We need to keep our partners accountable. And I want to say thank you to the Congressional Black Caucus and Chair Horsford for his leadership in ensuring that that everyone knows, they've been put on notice that this is still very important to all of us, not just some of us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining
Thank
us.
you.
And thank you for taking the time and the work that you are doing. And we are just grateful that you joined us this morning. So now we are going to move over into our next speaker, and I believe Chair Kenyatta will be joining us.
I am. Thank you so much. And back to back, as we mentioned last time, we had Kylie. Kylie and I went to school together, and has been my friend for many years. And she's been very generous and never coming on here trying to tell y'all stories. Okay, but but next, I'm really excited. They have another friend of ours, friend of mine, joining us today. The Congresswoman from Texas, 30th District, an incredible voice for Black Americans, not just in the great state of Texas, but all across our country, and somebody who we can always depend on to advocate alongside us for all the things that we laid out in our recommendations to the president and vice president. We know that she's going to be the type of person who's going to fight alongside us in Congress. And so I'm so grateful to introduce my dear friend, Texas's favorite daughter, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. It's good to see you, even if it's only virtually. And it's so good to be in this room. So many familiar faces. Thank you to each of you for your dedication to doing this work. And honestly, yes, my team has my prepared remarks and I will get right to them. But I do want to pick up somewhere that the previous speaker just left off. And she talked about the bottom line. And as I've been traveling the country, one of the things that I've been talking about, as I was a business major with an emphasis in finance in undergrad. And I talk to them and I say, would you rather have a portfolio that is diverse or not? And can you tell me why you prefer a diverse portfolio? And everyone can explain why it makes sense to have a diverse portfolio. And I explain to them all the time, there is no difference when we're looking at diversity across the board. It enhances everything because as one area may be struggling in some way, there is value that is added in another area. And that is the beauty of diversity. And if we can recognize the strength of diversity when it comes to our money, then we should be able to recognize the benefits overall as it relates to diversity when it comes to everything else. So I just wanted to let y'all know that I've been having lots of conversations to that tune as I've been traveling the country. But again, let me just say how inspired, joyful, and full of hope I am to see so much collective wisdom, thoughtfulness, experience, passion, and attention to the challenges and opportunities of Black education coming together in one place. Each of you have set aside time in a very busy schedule to come together to answer the president's call to advise policymakers on how we ensure every Black student in this country is able to realize their fullest potential. And make no mistake, the work you are doing and have been doing over the last year is more vital now than ever. As the fall 2024 college admissions data starts to come out, we have seen the percentage of Black students at elite institutions consistently decline. This is the direct result of a nakedly partisan Supreme Court decision to dismantle affirmative action programs at colleges across the country. Schools, students, and faculty alike are looking for guidance on how to adapt. In the House, partisan attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion show efforts by teachers, administrators, and policymakers to make much needed action. Attempts to push extreme partisan cuts to Title I school funding threaten the resources Black and rural students rely on to overcome systemic barriers. And the complete failure by Congress to reauthorize the Higher Education Act tells me more that needs to be done to educate members of Congress on the urgent needs of our HBCUs and higher education access more broadly. I also want to speak to issues I'm seeing firsthand in my district that echo problems by educators across the country. But I'm gonna pause here really quickly because just so we're clear, and I'm sure it's something you've been talking about, the affirmative action decision was an economic decision, period, full stop. This particular decision was about making sure that we could not only limit access of students to higher education, which therefore limits access to economic opportunities, but now that this wasn't just about education. In fact, it never was. It was about the wealth gap. It was about making sure that wealth gap that has actually been starting to shrink under this administration, that we further widen it. And we not only widen it for this next term or this current term, but for generations. So I do want to be clear. While what we saw on paper was only addressing education, it's a lot deeper than that. When it comes to my district, it has best in the nation medical institutions, but despite this, there are financial, cultural, and informational barriers to my Black students accessing mental health resources, which impact their academic trajectories. Across the country, we know the grim reality that biased enforcement of school disciplinary measures closes doors to many Black students before they're even old enough to drive. As our schools are recovering from COVID disruptions and kiddos are getting back into the classroom, we must acknowledge the disparate toll distance learning took on Black students. We need a sustained, concerted effort to recover from that learning loss. It does no good to offer days off to visit colleges like most schools offer in Texas if colleges aren't actively doing outreach to students who may not have resources to travel to the college or awareness of the availability of these opportunities. And we're going through a housing crisis. If we want students to have teachers that come from their community, especially in large cities like Dallas, we need to ensure teachers from the community can afford to live where they teach. Now, now, by no means is this an exhaustive list of challenges we're facing, but I hope I have underscored the importance of your work. When the Supreme Court and partisan bodies in Congress are actively creating barriers to equal opportunity for Black students on top of many local issues I've mentioned, the gravity of this moment is clear. That is why we need the people in this room to bring your collective wisdom together in service of bold, instructive recommendations. Because despite the challenge of this moment, I know how deep in my soul that this commission will rise to the occasion to meet it. The 119th Congress, the 47th President of the United States, students, educators, administrators, and policymakers across the country are looking for your guidance. Over the past century, presidents have called together experts from across American society to advise the nation on how to tackle the most pressing problems. In 1968, the report of Kerner Commission became a nationwide bestseller by clearly, convincingly, and boldly identifying the cause of civic unrest in the mid 60s as systemic injustice. In 1988, the Watkins Commission provided official governmental recognition to the HIV/AIDS crisis in the face of the administration's intent to turn a blind eye. Now, this commission, in the face of hostile political forces across the country, must speak boldly, comprehensively, and in a unified voice, informed by the immense collective wisdom and passion of each of you in this room. Know that you have champions in Congress ready to work. And with that, I will leave you to get back to your work and answer questions, I'm told.
Yes. Thank you so much, Congresswoman. I love that you ended your remarks with the word bold, because when I think of you, I think of bold brilliance. And my middle name is Blunt, so I am speaking truth when I say we appreciate your bold leadership and your courage to speak truth and the work that you do. And I'm glad that you came and you joined us today, this commission, to just share your insights and your passion and just your love for our community. At this time, I'm going to open it up for 2 questions. If we could just have 2 questions, because I know that you have to get back to work. So if there are 2 commissioners that would, Congressman, Commissioner Johnson would like to be the first, and Commissioner Cade will be the second.
Okay, perfect.
And I don't know the answer, so I'm asking a question. Have y'all, as in Congress, proposed, or are y'all looking at proposing any legislation that would ban legacy admissions at schools that receive any federal funding?
I'm unaware of any members proposing such legislation. The best I can tell you is that there are those that are trying to bring lawsuits that will make it all the way to the Supreme Court to get a decision from the Supreme Court to find out where the Supreme Court lands on that very issue, to see if it is helpful and instructive as they are attempting to, again, use the affirmative action decision to go far outside the realm of the decision itself. They are doing a lot to dismantle access, again, to capital for those small Black-owned businesses. I will say this is an opportunity to applaud the Department of Transportation specifically and their Civil Rights Division, as they did decide that they were going to come up with new instructions on how to proceed in an effort to combat what they anticipate they were going to get and what we've already started to see a little bit of. So I think that if we focus just on schools, it may be limited in that way if we put it in the form of legislation. I will say that if for some reason we do finally get to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court does take up that particular decision, or if they decide that they won't take it up, then at that point in time, we may do kind of a 1-for-1, at least for proposing it, if for no other reason than to start having the conversations in committee and on the floors once there is a different controlling entity of the House.
Thank you. Commissioner Cade.
Yes, good morning. Thank you so much, Congresswoman, for joining us. First and foremost, I just want to thank you for acknowledging the disproportionate impact that COVID has had on the mental well-being of communities that were impacted disproportionately higher. Initially, the federal government set aside a lot of recovery funding during the onset of coming out of COVID. Now that we're really beginning to see the real gravity of that, the mental health crisis that our nation is undergoing, and the implications that that has for our children and our schools, do you think there will be additional conversations regarding recovery funds directed at the mental health crisis that our nation is really dealing with?
I think that there is one side that acknowledges the crisis before that crisis causes another. And then there's another side that sends thoughts and prayers at the end of a crisis and blames the mental health. Just so y'all are aware, this is a passion area for me. I actually served on the board for the largest mental health provider in North Texas, outside of the jail, that is. And so I served on that board until I ran for office, and I was required to step down because they actually received monies from the state. So I was required to step down when I ran for the state house. I will tell you that our big heroes in this entire story have been our educators and our administrators, because in my district specifically, I was able to talk to some of my superintendents that took a lot of those funds, and specifically brought in additional mental health providers because people were losing family members and things like that. It was just this very abnormal time, not to mention just kind of the social disruption that took place by students not being able to kind of be in school. And one of the big benefits of being physically in school is the social development. So I can tell you that specifically for my district, I've been lobbied because they aren't able to continue on and sustain a number of these additional kind of helpers that they need. Specifically, so many of our public schools have been underfunded in general. That this still was not kind of a full funding moment for most of them. It was, thank you for helping me out some, but there's still a gap to be filled. I will tell you that consistently, as we are constantly having conversations around the budget, as we are approaching our next budget deadline of September 30th, and seems like we're a little confused about how to do a budget here, but nevertheless, a lot of the conversations are all about, we need to roll back to pre-COVID numbers. And so it is a constant request to take the numbers down and not take them up, yet they talk about inflation. So I'm not really sure like how you make the two work, because either there's been hyperinflation, which means the cost of everything went up, which means that our budget should technically go up, or there's not been hyperinflation. But the explanation that's been given is that if we are out of COVID and we only did this because of COVID, then the numbers need to come down to pre-COVID numbers. And when I'm talking about coming down to pre-COVID numbers, some people are proposing numbers that are over a decade ago. So do I anticipate anything in the foregoing future, or in the soon to be, by the end of the month? No. Let me just not even try to beat around the bush. And the continuing resolution that has been proposed by my colleagues seemingly doesn't have enough support to make it across the line, but we'll see if they're better at counting than they have been the rest of this term. And so that particular proposed budget, again, it pulls out money. It's not additional resources. And the final point that I'll make, because we are talking about mental health, is one of the things that we're really stressing is that they are proposing a $12 billion cut to our veterans. And most people don't think about the challenges of our kiddos when they think about mental health. There is one group of folk that we consistently think about when we think about mental health, and it's our veterans. They are turning their back on them right now, at least proposing to, in the form of a $12 billion cut to them, and turning our back on the PAC Act and the support that we gave them. So if we're not giving the resources to our veterans, I don't anticipate that we are proposing to give resources to students, when currently, I know we've got my good friend from Georgia here. We just saw what happened in the last week. And beyond COVID, it's just the gun violence, and consistently seeing that across the board, which is causing so many issues. Most of you in this room look like you are old enough to not have gone to school at a time in which active shooter drills were a reality. This is the sad reality in this country right now. And so there's a lot of reasons, in my opinion, that we should support our students. We should give them the mental health access that we need. And even beyond, this will be my final point. I feel like a Baptist preacher at this moment. Is that even when you look at a district like mine, where 20% live at or below poverty, it is a majority minority district. Unfortunately, they have needed mental health resources before COVID. My kiddos were struggling with so many challenges. As someone who did criminal defense, I can tell you that I have some of the highest incarcerated zip codes in the entire state. So from, losing parents because of the system or just the environments in general, a lot of my kids have been struggling and needed a little extra in the first place. And I'm sure that my district is not unique in that way. I'm sure that there are so many other districts where our kiddos, specifically the ones that are of color, are struggling because of some of these issues. So thank you again for the work that you do. I really do applaud it. This is a passion area of mine as somebody who was allowed to practice civil rights law. I ain't allowed to do much of nothing now. But I do thank you and appreciate your time.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Thank you.
And I'd like to present you with this certificate of appreciation on behalf of the initiative.
Thank you.
And now, turn it back over to Commissioner Blunt-Carter.
Yes. Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
At this Commissioners and our viewing audience, welcome back. We are back on schedule, and now we will be hearing from our next speaker, who is Derek Lewis II. And Derek currently serves as the Interim National Director of Youth and College. Previously, he served as the Field Manager of the NAACP Youth and College Division. In this role, he served and supported more than 700 NAACP youth and college units actively involved in the fight for civil rights across the country. Derek brings 8 years of experience in grassroots organizing and training on a state and local level as both a member, leader, and national staff member. Derek has increased unit capacity across the country with 212 new chartered and reactivated NAACP units during his time as the Youth and College Division. He has also worked on increasing voter registration and turnout for Black youth and campaigns around key issue areas such as gun violence and police accountability. Derek is committed to building Black political power through youth leadership development, advocacy, and direct action. With his organizing efforts, Derek has his own proclaimed day in Austin, Texas, known as Derek Lewis II Day. In 2019, he was recognized by the Greater Austin Black Chamber of Commerce as Advocate of the Year.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
I hope that everyone is doing well. Just to quickly introduce myself, my name is Derek Lewis. I currently serve as the Interim National Director for the NAACP Youth and College Division, and I'm glad to be with you all today. Outside of the title, Derek Lewis, 29-year-old Black male from Lamarck, Texas. I carry immense pride in where I come from because, frankly, not too many Black men make it out. I was raised by my great aunt. I call her my Mimo. Due to both of my parents being incarcerated, my Mimo instilled in me the importance of education, hard work, and dreaming big. Although I faced my own academic challenges, I became the first in my family to attend college, earning my degree at Houston-Tillotson University, where I graduated at the top of my class. Graduated at the top of my class in 2018 and served as senior class president. Thank you. But why does this matter? Only 26% of students from low-income families graduate from college, and just 15% of those with incarcerated parents reach that milestone. My high school, Lamarck High School in Lamarck, Texas, has a graduation rate of 82%, but only 29% of its students are actively pursuing higher education or vocational programs. This is not due to a lack of interest, but rather a lack of education and economic opportunities that make obtaining the American dream a bit unobtainable, where youth are faced with the or of life instead of the and. Um, we live in a world where the challenges adults, with the challenges that adults face, are also the reality of our youth, from affordable housing to access to capital. Systemic inequalities are shaping the futures of Black youth across the country. As an alum of Houston Tillotson University, Austin's first institution of higher learning, a proud HBCU in Austin, of seeing firsthand how my institution has served as a pillar of change. Yet, despite record-breaking enrollment this year, Houston Tillotson University, like many other HBCUs, are facing a problem. This problem is a severe housing shortage. Why? Because the cost of living is simply too high for students to afford off-campus housing, forcing many into limited on-campus spaces. The root cause of this issue is systematic underfunding of HBCUs, preventing these institutions from building the infrastructure necessary to meet the growing demand. We must advocate for federal oversight to ensure that funding fairly distributed to Black communities by supporting minority institutions, minority serving institutions in HBCUs. We can provide greater access to the capital needed to enhance education and economic opportunities for Black youth. As the interim national director of the NAACP Youth and College Division, as stated, I have the privilege to oversee over 28,000 youth members across the country that represent 700 youth councils, college chapters, and high school chapters that make up the great NAACP. We recently polled our youth on issues that matter most to them that will help them to go cast a vote in this upcoming election. And their top concerns were education and gun violence. Specifically, they spoke about the overall burden of student debt and the diminishing opportunities for higher education due to the elimination of affirmative action and DEI programming. Yes, canceling student debt is crucial, but we must also make college affordable and accessible once again. Education should not be a financial burden, but it should be a pathway to becoming a productive citizen and contributing to our local community and our nation overall. We can learn from cities like San Francisco, which offers 2 years of free community college to its residents, reducing student debt and increasing access to higher education. We must also protect Black history in education, expand financial aid, and promote truthful and inclusive curriculum for our students. With the rollback of our DEI program, some institutions have rebranded their efforts under different names. Maybe access and opportunity. It may not be called diversity, equity, and inclusion, but there's a name game that's going on. However, this doesn't change the fact that Black students at predominantly white institutions still feel or face unsafe and unwelcoming environments. For example, the NAACP College Chapter at the University of South Carolina is currently addressing the harmful co-sponsoring of an event by far-right extremist groups like the Proud Boys, which has incited fear and hate amongst our community. This shows us that institutions must be held accountable for creating safe and inclusive spaces for all students. And let's not forget about the epidemic of gun violence. Our youth have gone from preparing for natural disasters to now preparing for active shooters. In Georgia and Maryland, we've already seen school shootings this year, with some parents now planning for funerals instead of homecoming celebrations. While we have seen slight decrease in gun homicides, the reality remains: youth are still dying. We need robust policies to prevent gun violence, such as universal background checks, red flag laws, bans on assault weapons, and yes, safe, secure storage laws. Policies that are actively working to prevent gun violence and also addressing the impact and access of mental health caused by gun violence. Schools should be places of learning and not fear. In conclusion, I call for a new deal for our youth, one that meets their needs and concerns. We must lessen the burden of student debt, make college affordable, and create environments where students can learn, grow, and thrive. Let's ensure that Black youth like myself are not only given the opportunity to pursue higher education, but also are feeling supported in building the economic foundation that they need to succeed. To the Presidential Advisory Commission on Advancing Educational Equity, Excellence, and Economic Opportunities for Black Americans, I respectfully present these specific asks when it comes to increasing federal funding for HBCUs and MSIs, establishing permanent protections for DEI programs, strengthen access to capital for Black communities, support student debt cancellation, we say all of it, and college affordability, and commit to gun violence prevention in schools, invest in inclusive, truthful curriculum, which will further advance our students in how they are prepared for this world. Together, working in unison, these actions can help bridge the gap in education and economic opportunities for Black youth. I urge the Commission to act boldly, as we said earlier, and with urgency because the future of our nation depends on it. Thank you for your time and for allowing me to share my vision of a better, more equitable future for Black youth across this country.
Mr. Lewis, thank you so much for your presentation today, for joining us, for the work that you're doing, for the work that you're doing that brings the NAACP back and engages young people. At our last commission meeting, we talked a lot about including the voice of a younger generation, and you are an answer to our prayer. I wanted to open this up to the commission for questions for our speaker today. And I also wanted to point out to you, Mr. Lewis, someone that I think in this commission that you should just get to know, and that is Commissioner Smith, who has served as the president of NAACP for decades in Delaware. So thank you, Mr. Smith, for your service. And I would love to see that bridge of generations as you share ideas and you really learn from the wisdom of Mr. Smith, but also that you share so that he can continue to do this work in his state.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, President, I believe in revolution. Revolution is change. When you talk about free college and stuff, at Delaware State University, you get 4 years free. All our community colleges is 2 years free. The only split we got right now is charter schools versus public schools. And we don't watch it. The white parents is taking all their kids out of public schools and leaving our kids and the trouble kids in public school Black. So the fight and your fight within those PIS up is that fight to make the public schools more stronger and stuff, and fight for more Black teachers and stuff. So our kids can identify with our race instead of identify with somebody else's race. I'm here for you. You got my card. Thank you, my young brother.
Thank you.
Commissioner Nesbitt had a question.
Mr. Lewis, thank you for your remarks. I was hoping that you would think about your friend circle and your fellow alumni. We have been hungry for the perspective from people in your age group, and I'm specifically curious about barriers you see to your friend group, your fellow alumni base, and becoming entrepreneurs. So it's been said previously, access to capital is one, and obviously revenue once you start that business is another. But that already automatically presumes that you've gotten to the starting line and you actually have started the business.
Mhm.
Before you get to that point, what barriers have you seen in your community for people aspiring to even become entrepreneurs?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think even for myself, my own personal capacity with my nonprofit that I run, I have ran across this and talking to other friends, right? I believe that everybody in America wants to live a quality life, right? And a lot of my friends do want to go the route of entrepreneurship, two things within my friend groups. One of my friend groups are highly educated. Two of my friend groups, I mean, a second side of my friend group has only gone as far as a high school education, right? And with that, that does become a barrier when it comes to lack of education, lack of knowledge, or what are the proper steps, resources, and support that is around me in my community that can support me to build or to support my business. I think oftentimes that a lot of my friends have a lot of great ideas to what they want to do, but now when you ask them what is the 5 year, the 10 year plan, how do they work to sustain themselves past the idea of, oh, this is a great idea. Now we're thinking about how does this business not just create itself for the existence work, but now to create itself for now sustainable change, impacting that community. But to answer the question, like, yes, we all know that it is economics, but also education. I think that also when it comes to education, when it comes to peer and also community support, a lot of times my generation is asking for support. We are looking for elders to show us the way, and we want to learn from those big pockets. We want to know what you all have done to be successful, and understanding that it looks different now in the 21st century than what it did 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, as far as the business aspect. So one, education, having access to those resources, but also understanding that when we are going into entrepreneurship, that as youth, that we are looking for also support from the generation that has done it before us as well. So making sure that we have that bridging connection, not just in advocacy, but also in support, business, and economics as well.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Lawson.
Mr. Lewis, it is my privilege to say how proud I am of you and your journey as the president of a 2 year HBCU in Texas.
Yes.
You are a phenomenal young man. I do wish to encourage you to continue to walk in your passion. You've given us 3 areas that we needed to focus in on, and I'm certain that we will be attentive and responsive to those 3 areas. So I'm going to flip the script and now ask you to give us your top 3 resources that you will need to continue in the journey that you're on.
That's great. Top 3 resources that I will need. I'm always going to ask for a community. So I know that we've made a few connections. I made some people here. Community is always needed for anybody that's going through this. I think that also within community is also shared knowledge. I don't know everything. I think I may have a few innovative solutions to what our problems may be. But making sure that we have that shared knowledge as far as what you all have learned previously, how you all have become successful in your own individual roles. But I think for me, what I am also interested in is how to get more involved in actually making change and influence policy. I think that what you all are doing now serves as a great example for that, but we all understand that the policy and the laws that govern our lives is what dictates our lives. From the positions in the positions of influence that you all are in, how did you influence policy, if that was on the federal level, if not on the federal level, most importantly on the state and local level, because we know that on local level, that's where our members of a community are seeing more of the impact of the policies, but most importantly can see that change in real time. So community wisdom, but also learning from you all when it comes to being how to make an effective influence on policy and being that catalyst of change.
Thank you. You are truly the epitome of the youth of African American young men. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Commissioner Lawson, what a great way to end this session, this part right here. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and then when we come back, we are going to enter into commission business. Thank you. Okay, good afternoon, commissioners. Please continue with our working lunch here, but we have a very, very special guest who has joined us, and Commissioner Evans is going to provide a brief introduction, and we'll turn the program over to Representative Davis.
Good morning. Again, or good afternoon again. I will be very brief. You know, in my day job, I have the good fortune of serving as executive director of the Congressional Black Caucus, where we have 60 members, the largest in our history. We have one of the more senior members of our caucus with us today. He needs not a long introduction. He has served here in the Congress since 1996. There are a few individuals who we have in this caucus, but not just in the CBC, in the Congress today, that have had such an outside influence on issues around education, particularly on historically black colleges and universities. The fact of the matter is, Congressman Danny Davis has no peer on the issues that I know he will speak to us about today. And so we are very fortunate to have his stalwart leadership. You know, Congressman Davis has an ability every 2 years, he just keeps on coming back to this place to continue to do the work, and he is well respected amongst his colleagues on both sides of the aisle. So with that, Congressman Danny Davis of the state of Illinois.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And let me first of all just thank Vince for those very kind words and remarks that he made. Whenever I hear people talk that way, it reminds me of my mother, who told us growing up that flattery, like perfume, is to be smelled and not swallowed. So you just take whatever it is that you get and move right ahead. But let me just say that I am delighted to be here for a few moments. And first of all, want to commend the White House. I commend the White House for understanding that if you are behind, the only thing that you can really do is try to catch up. And in order to catch up, you need to do something special. You need to do something that's a little different. You need to do more than what you've been doing. I always compared, I grew up a few miles from Scottie Pippen and in Arkansas. And we used to say Scottie was a great athlete. And if you were about a half a mile behind Scottie and he had on some gym shoes and you had on some hip boots, you pretty much was going to have a hard time catching up. And so if you're not doing something special, if you're not doing something different, if you're not doing something unique, catching up is impossible. There's nothing more effective, there's nothing more valuable than this commodity that we call education, because it does a lot of different things. Lots of people have had things to say about it. Abraham Lincoln was fond of saying that education makes a man easy to lead, but difficult to drive, easy to govern, but impossible to enslave. A lot of other folks had some things. Harriet Tubman probably said something that was profound. She said that there were some people who didn't like education because they say it made fools out of people. But then she said she knew more fools who didn't have any. And if you had to be a fool, you may as well be an educated fool. And so education is a part of the catch up, the catching up that we try to do as a country, given the experiences that African Americans have had, given the experiences that other minority groups in this country have had. Catching up is desirable. And of all the things that we can give to people is hope. If you lose hope, then you don't have it. I think of my own experiences of having grown up in rural America, went to a one-room school where one teacher, Miss Beatty King, taught 8 grades in a room about the size of this room. But she was a reading teacher. And by the time we finished high school, there were 8 of us in our graduating class. But she had taught us the idea that if you learn to read and read and read, you can do whatever it is in the world that you need to do, because you can have experiences that you can't otherwise have. You can go places you can't otherwise go. You can do things that you can't otherwise do. So putting a focus on education opens one's doors to the extent that you never have to really be lonely. You never have to really be bored. You never have to think that you're shut out or you're behind. So, education to me has always been the absolute key, because if you've got hope, then you can move whatever mountains that might be in the way. And you can do whatever you want to do or decide. And then when you bring all of that together and organize it, interact with like minded individuals who are trying to accomplish the same thing, then the sky becomes the limit. You go everywhere. You've been everywhere. It's good to see all of you here. It's good to see constituents of mine, see individuals that I have worked with and had the opportunity to learn from. I just left a Ways and Means Committee meeting where we were trying to decide some things. I serve on the Ways and Means Committee, and of course, we're the tax writing group. We're the group that have to try and figure out how do you pay for whatever it is that you're going to do. You can have a lot of good ideas, a lot of great ideas, but if you can't figure out a way to pay for it, of course, it never happens. So, figuring out who pays what and how do we come up with the monies that are needed? How do we get the money to increase historically black colleges and universities? How do we get the money to fund and provide funded opportunities for this new group we call predominant black institutions, PBIs, that oftentimes we kind of leave out of the discussion when we talk about funding because they're not old. They're not old enough. They haven't been around long enough to be in the same category as the HBCUs, but they serve the same population group. Those individuals just go to some of the many community colleges and other more lately developed colleges and universities. So it's good to stop by. It's good to see you engaged and involved. And it's going to be another America pretty soon because we're going to do some things that we've never done. And we're going to elect a black woman, African American woman of mixed heritage, to be president of these United States of America. And that's going to put us even more deeply into working hard to help make America becomes what has never been, but the America that we know has the potential to be. So thank you all very much. It's a pleasure indeed, and enjoy your lunch. Oh, what is this? A certificate of appreciation. Well, thank you very much. Nobody feels good, especially I just had a birthday, so.
Yes. Congressman, sir, is it okay if we ask you a couple of questions from the commission? Wonderful. The first question is from Commissioner Baskerville, followed by Commissioner Cade.
thank you very much. And I don't have a question for you. I want to just thank you immeasurably for your tremendous work. And I'm sorry. Thank you immeasurably for your tremendous work. And people do know about the tremendous work with HBCUs. But what my colleagues don't know, and you reference predominantly Black colleges, Congressman Davis and one other member of Congress, Major Owens, who has left the Congress shortly, but these two gentlemen single-handedly created the cohort of predominantly Black institutions at our urging. And we now have roughly 400,000 students that are going to these institutions. To be a PBI, you have to have 40% African American, full-time enrolled African Americans, 50% of whom are low income, first generation, and some other criteria. But it's remarkable, and it was important to us because we had Hispanic serving institutions, Asian Pacific Islanders, Hawaiian natives, and so forth. And HBCUs have no race or ethnic criterion. And so we did that, and he led it and is doing a remarkable job. And he continues to do that. He talked about the dollars. His staff, there's Dr. Jill Hunter Williams and other great people, but they start the Congressional Black Caucus budget. It was mentioned that they released some of the Congressional Black Caucus budget yesterday. It starts with Congressman Davis. And we just can't thank you enough. Final thing I'll say about him is that he's also the lead on hospitals for indigent care, making sure that people who are bereft of resources get world-class hospitals and medical support. I love him. I was privileged to travel with him to try and stand up a research park, an international U.S. Jamaican research park, and I hope we can do that before it's all over. But thank you so, so very much.
You know, the interesting thing about individuals talking about what somebody else may have done, the commissioner didn't tell you that she actually was the lead on developing this category of institutions. There are about 100 of them. In Chicago, Illinois alone, we have about 10. Chicago State University, Malcolm X College, Kennedy King College, Olive Harvey College, South Suburban College. We've had a couple of others have been in and out based on their enrollment, East West University, and individuals who do great work. And that's what she has done for a number of years, especially in the education arena and in the higher education arena, that has kept funds flowing, that has provided leadership, and have kept the issues in front of individuals who can make decisions. So thank you. Thank you for your outstanding work.
Yes, we are fortunate to have Commissioner Baskerville on this commission. And you are the one that educated me on PBIs. So thank you. We have two more questions, if that's okay.
That's good.
Commissioner Richmond, followed by Commissioner Holmes.
Thank you, Congressman. I'm Marissa Richmond from Tennessee. Especially because of your role on the Ways and Means Committee, is there anything in this particular report that we're preparing that would help in the discussions either on funding or budget for public education, especially on behalf of Black Americans? I realize the racists aren't going to read anything we produce in the first place, but maybe there's somebody sort of in the middle and there's an argument that we could help sort of solidify to make sure that our schools and our students are properly funded. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And let me just tell you, I love Tennessee because I grew up in Arkansas. And half of my class in college was from Memphis. And we used to joke and say that everybody from Memphis could do something. They were either outstanding athletes, or they could sing, they could do music, they could do theater, they could do whatever. And of course, I had the good fortune to be at Fisk a couple of years ago.
My
for
dad
their-
taught at Fisk. So.
Oh, that's it. but yes, deciding who pays what. And people don't like taxation. Nobody has ever come to my office and asked me to increase their taxes. I've never had anybody, no matter how wealthy or how middle class or how poor, nobody really likes taxes. But it's been said that taxation is the price that we pay for civilized society. Frederick Douglass, who was my real philosopher guy that I've always loved, used to say that he knew one thing if he didn't know anything else. He knew that in this society, you had to pay for whatever it is that you got. And he would often say, you may not get everything that you pay for, but you will pay for everything that you get. Somebody have to pay. And the challenge is to make sure that those who have the most pay their fair share. Make sure that wealthy corporations, make sure that wealthy individuals pay the most, because the people at the bottom and in the middle don't have the resources. So paying for things is the big divide, and much of the big divide between individuals who call themselves Democrats and others who call themselves Republicans. The big divide is the issue of taxation. Who pays for what? And as far as I'm concerned, those who have the most should pay the most.
Yeah, thank you, Congressman Davis. This is my congressman from my state of Illinois. I've had the good fortune to be able to know him and work with him for almost 20 years. And I think when we talk about leadership and we talk about people actually doing for people, Congressman Davis has shown that in Illinois. And I see he's been showing it across this country for all the years that he's been in office. So I just want to commend him and thank him for being here today.
Well, Michael, it's been a pleasure working with you. But the good thing about public life is that you get an opportunity to meet and interact with so many outstanding people until you're just fascinated, because all the time you run into individuals wherever you go. I can think of groups we used to call consumers. Health has been my big area. Well, actually, I have 23 hospitals in my congressional district. I represent a very diverse area. Downtown Chicago, the Magnificent Mile, the Gold Coast, the west side of the city, south side of the city, 4 medical schools. I've got 12 of these community health centers in my district. Obviously, I've got billionaires and I've got poverty stricken. I've got Ukrainian Village. I represent Chinatown. I represent an area we call Little Italy, which is an Italian community. I represent upscale suburban communities. I represent the largest poverty group in the city of Chicago. And the fun of interacting with all of these people all of the time kind of keeps me alert. It keeps me moving. I walked 4.5 miles Saturday before last in my 45th annual back to school picnic and parade. I've been in office since 1979. I'm trying to figure out, but it's the people who've always, I always say it's the people. It's not the big corporate entities. It's not the big political machines. It's not any of that. It's the people in the communities that I live and work with who have put me in office. And I always feel that if I let them down, then I have betrayed the trust that they have put in me. So public service should also be public trust, a charge to keep I have, a God to glorify, a never dying soul to save, and fitted for the sky. To serve this present age, my calling to fulfill. What do I, in all thy power, engage to do the Master's will? Public trust.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, happy birthday. Thank you.
A picture. Did you all want to take a picture?
Oh, picture. Picture.
Okay, thank you so much, and welcome back, everyone. Appreciate all of your patience and flexibility for today's meeting. And so, with that, we are going to begin commission business and go ahead and have a conversation about our policy papers as well as recommendations. We will do our best to condense this conversation. And so, with that, I'm going to turn it over to our deputy to help facilitate this portion of the program. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Executive Director Holmes. And first and foremost, I want to thank the commissioners for your diligence and commitment to developing these policy papers and recommendations, in part because there was an effort to span the diversity and complexity of Black Americans. And we can see evidence of that. In this section of our agenda, we will certainly hear about the updates, but we also want to be able to vote to accept the full committee report and discuss next steps. Then we'll move from finalizing the policy paper to determining the key recommendations that will be submitted. But before we do, as context, over the last several months, as you know, you've engaged in working groups that really had an opportunity to showcase the arc of different opportunity areas that we have within our communities. There was an opportunity to go from your problem statements to setting the context to thinking through acceptable solutions and what the criteria was for those solutions. And then there was an opportunity after extensive research and folks had both qualitative and quantitative insights. There's an opportunity to then put forth recommendations that would be presented to the president through our Secretary of Education. Of course, you heard from him earlier today. And I think what's sticking out to me is what he said in terms of your work has never been more important. Your policy papers and recommendations have never been more important to be bold, to be innovative, to think about not just what you heard in this context from the subject matter experts, but the fact that you're subject matter experts in your own field and on the ground. And so we are so excited to see and help develop further iterations of your policy papers and recommendations. So, in order to do so, we will move to this part of the facilitation, which is really an update from our working group chairs. I'd love to open the floor now for Commissioner Lassiter to share a policy paper update on the Civil Rights and Education Working Group.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor to serve as co-chair along with Dr. Richmond and to work in conjunction with our entire committee. We were asked to look at the assault on historical significant efforts in education from a historical standpoint, the impact of book bans, threats to critical race theory or the misinformation as it pertains to critical race theory, attacks on trans education. We were also tasked with looking at addressing teacher shortages and fostering diversity. And so our recommendations for educational improvement are as follows. Within the realm of urban education, implement targeted funding that addresses the specific needs of urban schools, focusing on infrastructure, resources, and mentoring programs to support students. Under suburban education, encourage dialogue and partnerships between suburban schools and urban communities to share resources as well as to diversify educational experiences. And we can't leave out the rural aspect of education. Create incentives for teachers to work in rural areas, ensuring access to quality education for all students, regardless of geographic location. And so then when we go down to addressing teacher shortages and fostering diversity, some of the recommendations around recruitment strategies were to partner with historical Black colleges and universities to establish mentorship and recruitment programs for aspiring Black male educators. The work of Sharif El Mekki and others come to mind. Develop initiatives that encourage high school students to pursue careers in education with the focus on teaching as a means of community empowerment. Enhance awareness of scholarship opportunities and career paths in education, specifically targeting Black males. And so we concluded with the following recommendations to the president. Revise national education standards to incorporate diverse histories and perspectives, ensuring that all students have access to comprehensive education. Fund initiatives to support diverse educators, including programs focused on recruitment, retention, and professional development of Black male teachers. Enhancing funding in schools to underserved areas to address the educational disparities affecting communities of color. Fourth recommendation was to investigate and address systemic barriers, focusing on policy changes that tackle racism and bias in educational systems. Five, promote educational equity by investing in community-based educational programs, ensuring that historical perspectives, particularly those of marginalized groups, are prioritized in overall curriculum development. And then lastly, when you get to this aspect of what's truly needed, we reach consensus that it's really about the importance of a pedagogy of justice. In response to these challenges, adopting a pedagogy of justice is crucial. This framework emphasizes the teaching of historical accounts that highlight struggles for empowerment and resilience, encouraging students to understand fosters a sense of agency and responsibility towards social change. Lastly, the gentleman who created this initiative, the congressman, mentioned the word hope. And I'm reminded of Martin Luther King's quote that we must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope.
Thank you, Commissioner Lassiter, and thank you to all of the committee members. I want to open the floor for just a couple of minutes for discussion. I will also note for the audience that the commissioners have in front of them both an embargoed copy of the policy paper as well as draft recommendations. With that being said, open the floor for discussion.
I have a question that I raised to Marissa after we heard from the student Derek Lewis, and he talked a lot about gun violence, which
It's
is it on?
it's on. Just
Okay.
a little closer.
The student talked a lot about gun violence, and I realized we had not incorporated that into any of our recommendations in our papers. I was just wondering if you all had thought about that, or whether it's something we ought to consider going forward.
We haven't. That's not in our paper. That wasn't our charge. But once again, I'm glad that you brought it to the context because it's not an either or; it's a both and. Given the context of my hometown of Philadelphia, savaged and ravaged by gun violence, I think it's something that we definitely should be able to look at before we conclude with this. But I'll defer to Executive Director Holmes and her team to see where it actually sits. You can make an argument that if I'm being bullied in my catchment area, I'm not coming to school. That leads to high rates of mental health, depression, and things of that nature. If I'm hearing gunshots, but once again, whatever the recommendation is for where it sits in our social justice bucket, we're able to kind of explore it and implement it if need be.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please jump in. Commissioner Cade.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Lassiter and the entire group that worked on the civil rights and education. And I thought you guys made some really good recommendations. I think one of the things that we have to think about when we talk about education, and the one thing being in the K-12 space for over 37 years and now going over to the mental health space and leading a nonprofit, is the issue around mental health with our young people. That really impacts gun violence, that really impacts the learning environment and the ability for young people to get access to education. Because if there's one or two young people that demonstrate needs for mental health supports or behavioral symptoms, that leads to either them being pushed out or put out of school or disrupting the learning for others. And so as we think about a moral imperative, right, an obligation in education being a 21st century civil rights issue, I'm going to continue to push us to think about the interconnectedness to the holistic needs of our young people. And our country's looming mental health crisis will continue to be at the center of school shootings, gun violence in our communities, and limiting our access and our ability to really inspire hope and empower others. So I think that it's going to show up in some of the other papers, and when we talk about education, I don't think we can not talk about mental health.
Intellectually and as pragmatists, I think we should go back and look at that because there is the intersection. And I just want to just say publicly for the record, that I'm really truly relevant if I don't see my black and brown face in the pages of the text. If the teacher in front of me does not understand the context of from which I come from, and they can't answer the fundamental question of, do you see me as a human being or do you see me as non-person, non-entity? So I think our committee has a lot more work to do. That's why it's called a draft.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Peace.
I also want to thank the group, and just to follow up on Commissioner Lassiter and Commissioner Cade, as a woman who's ably challenged, that is also very important. New York City just instituted that whole new division within the Department of Education for students who are ably challenged and have English as a second language. And this was started because, we have been excluded. And I say we because I'm a member of that community, as in addition to being an African American woman. But we need to find ways that they can be integrated back into the general population. And sometimes when they are recognized for being, um, uh, they don't recognize their disability for being um, a truant or being a difficult student. I had to speak to someone recently because they think of epilepsy. I have epilepsy, and they always think of two types of epilepsy. But they had a student who we now identify 8 types of epilepsy. And the person who had the challenge was not being treated properly. So that is the other thing that we must consider as we're going forward with this. A number of our children have medically treatable diseases, but they're not identified early enough. And if they're going to go into the middle class, and succeed in higher education or even a trade, we must make sure that they have the proper with mental health and physical health going forward.
Absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner Peace. Yes.
I too want to speak on the mental health piece, and I'm glad that Commissioner Lassiter brought that up. It made me think about the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act and the money that this administration has put forward in both addressing gun violence and making our communities safer, but also in funding for mental health services in our schools. And I really want in our paper that we make, that something that is not only protected but built upon, right? We don't have to recreate it. It's already there, the Safer Communities Act. And so, putting the funding so that we have the licensed clinical social workers there that can deal with our children and the problems that they're facing from a holistic perspective, from a strengths-based perspective. I think that's necessary. So I wasn't sure where it fit in our working group. It doesn't fit into ours, which is expanding the middle class, but I really do think that it fits into yours.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Smith?
I think that in Delaware we do give out medicine, but one thing that kids do who have a mental problem that I deal with is when they call psychology, they basically want a black psychologist, and they don't really want to talk to a white. So I'm thinking this report, not only black teachers we need black psychologists and stuff to be so our kids can talk to them right and understand their problems and stuff. Because a white psychologist, a white teacher don't understand the kids' problems and stuff. So
Thank you, Commissioner Smith. Commissioner Nesbitt?
So I know I'm going in the right direction if I'm thinking along the same wavelength as Mouse. Um, I was exactly actually what I was going to say. I was going to tell a personal story. During the pandemic, I lost my father, and first time in my life I ever decided myself in need of these services, and I went reaching out to find somebody black, and found out that people of our color in the mental health professions don't even make up the same percentage of the population that we make up. We are woefully underrepresented in that space. And as an adult, I felt exactly how you felt. And I'd been taught by people of various colors. So I would imagine that it's got to be doubly true for children. So absolutely anything that we can put in this paper to incentivize education, to forgive loans, to be able, so you're putting the money for the resources, but if there aren't people actually there to be able to provide the services, it's going to be another failed program.
and let me say this to back up. It's one concept of helping the child, but if the child had to go to an institution, we still don't have black psychologists and stuff. So the child come from the institution without nothing. Like we took a child 16 years old to an institution, and we asked the people to take his clothes off and make sure he was naked, and they left the sheet there. And 2 hours later, the young man hung himself. The the institutions don't pay attention to what teachers and others say about the child, and they just want to house the child. If we don't help the child or we don't understand the child, this problem is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And we're going to lose more and more kids to gun violence, to suicide, everything else.
Thank you, Commissioner Smith. And
One more.
of course.
I just wanted to piggyback on what Commissioner Nisbet had spoken to about loan forgiveness. And as a professor of social work, I know that that does not apply to us. Yet we need licensed clinical social workers in these spaces, individuals that take into consideration the environment, not just the individual. And so when we're using terms like psychologists and mental health, we need licensed clinical social workers. Yes. We need individuals that understand the community, understand the systems that are oppressing the community, understand the family, understands the child. And that is what social workers are trained to do. However, we're not in line for the public service loan forgiveness. And so when we talk about not having clinicians of color, it's because they don't have the resources to get out of debt to do that type of work. You know, that's a pipeline that we're not talking about. We're talking about teacher pipeline, but mental health providers that serve our community, that look like us, that come from those communities, they're not going into this type of work. They're going into private practice because they need to pay back the money that they had to put out to pay for that degree. So that for me is something personal that I want to see. As I am, motivating people to help our children, there has to be opportunities for them to be able to succeed as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Blunt Carter. And with that, I will just say within these reports, there are recommendations that span. Some are quite specific in terms of having these tangible outcomes that are directed to a particular agency. Others are a little more nebulous, but quite important, right, from a theoretical perspective. Commissioner Blunt Carter, what you just shared in terms of expanding the definition of public service, that is, well, I can't say it on because I'm neutral. But those are the types of recommendations that are incredibly helpful to think about, I can say from an agency perspective. And so, let's keep that going. And thinking about, again, the specific agencies, the tangible outcomes, and things that are in some ways within our locus of control. With that being said, we'll move to having a few presentations all in succession so we can make sure that we get through our policy updates, and then we'll save the discussion for the end. Okay. Our next presenter who's up is Commissioner Thompson, who will share more about our expanding and securing the Black middle class.
I think Commissioner Thompson had to leave the room, so.
Oh, okay.
So I'll take over, so to speak,
Thank you
with
for-
the members of the commission
Love
to
that.
chime in. The Black middle class, the president has always said that he wants to see us maintaining and expanding the Black middle class. And particularly in the Black community, one of the things that we have found is that the Black middle class, sometimes because of the economic conditions or the social inequities that were involved, that the Black middle class was really stages behind the middle class of the majority or the minority majority population that is not a person of color. The central challenge that we addressed was both to expand the middle class and to maintain the middle class through several items to making sure that the people that come behind us, our young people, can face challenges and to exceed those challenges and talk about some of the things that we need to do to mitigate wealth disparities, making sure that they have an excellent education, but also recognizing that in some ways the world is changing, and so that sometimes those, we think about, you have to go through get a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and in some places, if you're lucky, a doctorate. But there are other trade positions, and now with the social media, there may be other jobs that our young people should be looking at, but incorporating all of the things that we think of as traditional into the new economic environment. But we also making sure that our HBCUs, I'm glad that the congressman mentioned the minority serving institutions. He mentioned Congressman Major Owens, who is like an uncle to me, and Medgar Evers College in New York City. And then we have York College in Queens, New York City, that are really the firmament of our young people that are coming out of predominantly African American communities in New York City, and to making sure that they have the funds necessary and the program necessary to making sure, as I mentioned before, the black middle class. We had also talked about home ownership. As many of us have known that we inherited a home, maybe from a family member, we call it the family home. But I'm going to use my own personal condition. I developed stage 3 breast cancer. And sometimes cancer, I'm glad that we have this cancer moonshot and reducing the cost of medication, because because in our community, a lot of people, our main economic, uh, so to speak, uh, 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 home becomes our financial bellwether that is sacrificed because we're trying to keep medication or educational costs for a member of our family, and that main home is lost in terms of providing services in other areas of our environment. So we want to promote home ownership, financial literacy, and then the other thing is that something that has been dear to me throughout my career is encouraging entrepreneurship and small business growth. Well, that's one of the things that I've tried to do throughout my career as a bank regulator, and also as a government person at the General Services Administration, to making sure that government contracts is really a leader in terms of providing services that can be transferred into also the private sector, and addressing some of the systemic barriers in employment, to making sure that those systemic barriers are eliminated, and and uh, and I think that would be some of the things that we're going to be looking at and really tightening up for the paper. And I leave the floor open to the committee members if they want to add.
Yes, please, Commissioner Holmes.
Yeah, I just wanted to I was wondering, does it really make a difference if we don't list PBIs? We have minority serving institutions, but should we actually put in PBIs in the document as well and list all three categories?
We were just talking about that, and I think, and we talked about it in our work group.
I saw it in the draft.
Yeah, and I think that we should switch it out personally from minority serving institutions to HBCUs and PBIs.
Okay.
That's my personal thought. I think it's more specific to our charge for Black Americans, but. And especially after Congressman Davis finished speaking, I was like, yeah.
Could you clarify again? What are we switching it out to?
We're switching minority serving institutions to predominantly Black institutions, which are institutions that do not fit the criteria of HBCUs, but it's serving Black Americans specifically.
So you just wiped me out.
Yeah,
No,
that's
no.
the word.
What she said.
No.
So it's got to be
both.
I think
It's
what we
both.
want to do is HBCUs and
And
PBIs. because-
the both.
But,
We're not getting rid of
but we
HBCU.
also have to have Hispanic serving institutions, tribal.
Not in this commission, based on the charge of this
We have
commission.
a president.
I'm an HBCU.
Right, and that's in this.
That's okay. That's it.
Yeah, that stays. What I was saying was we would switch out because PBIs and MSIs are interchangeable in some people's minds or could overlap. So it would be
Right.
redundant to put PBIs and MSIs. I mean, that's up for
correct.
discussion.
No, that's correct. PBIs are technically MSIs. You're
Exactly.
absolutely right.
I agree.
But we want to highlight it because they have to have 40% African American
Absolutely.
students.
Absolutely.
The mic.
I'm sorry.
I agree.
Do you mind repeating it for the mic?
Yes, thank you. So I was just agreeing with the colleagues that we do need to single out the PBIs because this is on increasing educational equity, et cetera, for Black Americans, Black people. And PBIs have to have 40% African
enrollment
Americans, 50% of whom are low income and other criteria. They are also MSIs, but we can clump the rest of them together.
And call out HBCUs also.
Well, of course.
Absolutely.
Because-
Just making sure that.
Well, of
Yeah,
course.
and in our document, it
calls it out.
states
Yeah.
enhancing support for HBCUs and MSIs. And so we are just getting rid of the MSIs. That's it.
Okay. I did want to commend this committee on acknowledging the integral part of looking at the disparities in health. And, one of the things that I've always said to myself is there is no wealth without health. And that health has to start with our mental well-being and our physical well-being. So I want to just commend this committee for really singling that out. And I think being more specific and calling out the two institutions as they set apart is an important part of us being specific.
Thank you, Commissioner Kay.
Can I ask a question, please? What about the trades? What role do the trades play in this? Because I know Hampton University, when my family went to Hampton, they went to be a plumber, and they came back to Delaware, the first Black plumber with license. So do the trades play a part in this?
There's a provision in here that talks about implementing workforce development programs, creating, supporting job training. And I suggested, and it talks about apprenticeships and other programs, but I also suggested that we add to that something regarding strengthening the investments in two-year institutions and in 4 years that have job training programs. There's another effort afoot, I know, with AFSCME.
Commissioner.
I'm sorry. It's in the report. Okay, good.
And it
So-
overlaps in a lot of it.
Yeah.
It's going to come
All right,
up in.
Commissioner
it's gonna come up in
Nesbitt.
Things like this.
One other question for the committee.
Well, she wanted to finish, she didn't
Oh,
finish.
you're not finished?
But, I mean, it doesn't matter if somebody else is gonna talk about it who's done that research. I was just pointing out that there was also another section.
One question for the committee about your thoughts of usage of tax policy to help expand the middle class. I asked myself the same question for my own group, and I wasn't able really to come up with an answer. But if we think about how the mortgage interest tax deduction has largely gone unbenefited by us because we've frozen out of the housing markets, or if you think about carried interest deductions where we're not able to raise money for funds, but yet that carried interest is taxed at a lower rate. Any thoughts about ideas similarly to benefit our community?
Thank you, Commissioner Nesbitt. Was there a
May I?
response there?
Yes, I
Please.
wanted to, I was just saying something similar to Commissioner Johnson, that we really need to, we can add something like that when we talk about financial literacy. I think we could expand that literacy to include tax literacy. You know what I mean? I think that we need to when we talk about promoting home ownership, it's more than just how to buy a house. It's what all of that entails. So maybe that's where it could fit in, which you just suggested, I think.
Well, I want to thank the Expanding and Securing the Black Middle Class Working Group for all the work that you've done thus far. We're excited to take these recommendations and edits into consideration. As you know, I am going on record to say that there are certain parameters and guardrails that prohibit our team from making direct comment on these reports, in part because it is to be a reflection of the work and expertise of this group. So I am happy to be a bystander and support the process, but this has been incredibly helpful for us to start to get this on record and in the notes,
Yes,
ways in which we can expand.
Before you're leaving this, and it's not a long comment, but it's something that's in my spirit, and I worked on this team and I've talked about it, and I really want to put it on the record, and that is, I think the team has done an incredible job, and I'm proud and privileged and humbled to be a part of that work group. I've had concern from the beginning, and I continue to have concern about the way we're phrasing this and the fact that there may be confusion or there may be the sense that we're concerned with the middle class. We're not concerned about building a wealth class, and Black Americans have none, according to all the leading economists. And we don't, there is a suggestion that if you're going to build a middle class, you can move those who are locked in the margins and create that and expand the middle class. I think that implication is probably easy to get from this. But I just feel that if we're going just to the middle class, that's not high enough. And that's not going to close the wealth gap. We've got to grow. Right now, we've got 2 Black billionaires. And we've got negligible numbers of Blacks who are in charge of multinational corporations. And so I was told by someone that I have utmost respect for, Lonnie Johnson, and I defer to him on so much. He's a wise man, and I've listened to him for years, and he's never steered me wrong. And he thinks perhaps it has something to do with what is marketable and the optics and some other things. And I respect that, but I just don't have peace. But I also understand how to work in a group. And so if the majority says it's fine like this, I'll certainly defer to the majority. But I have some unrest about that. And about not talking about moving the boats that are stuck at the bottom, the people who are marginalized. There's nothing that says in order to get where we want, we've got to get the people who are locked out and left behind and move them up and expand the middle class. And then we've got to move them up so that we can grow a wealth class. So thank you for allowing me to say that. And I am totally with the group and whatever's the final decision.
Thank you, Commissioner.
One more thing, please.
Yes, Commissioner Smith.
That's my last question. We have a group called the Coalition of Black Coalition of Black Contractors, and it was almost $1 billion went for Delaware, for highways and stuff like that. And the only thing that the contractors could get was a job for $200,000 for business. The question was asked, how do you make a black millionaire? When these contracts come up and these young folks come out of school and they do $50,000 jobs and stuff, when do we move in the category of $1 million contract of $5 million? Out of the whole $1 billion, we only got $5 million out of it. So how do we fix up these white contractors and the bid process and the bond process to make black millionaires? That's something we should be addressing, because we ain't touching the part to be middle class, upper middle class, if we ain't making the money on in the 21st century, which is $1 million and more, to be, really say we are middle class or we are upper middle class.
Thank you, Commissioner Smith. And what I hear you saying is a recommendation that's related to contracting and procurement. And Commissioner Baskerville, to your point, just quite quickly, this report is the commission's report, your legacy. It memorializes your thoughts of this time in this period. So should you find that those things are important to telling the narrative of what is happening to what's happening right now and what is needed to advance Black Americans, I encourage you to put it in this report. If we need to dictate it, because I know everybody's busy, let's think about ways that we can really support the process, because this conversation that we're having right now is dynamic. And I don't know that it's all landing in the paper.
Right.
Thank you.
So I serve on the same committee with Commissioner Baskerville, and I agree that a lot was discussed and a lot has yet to hit this document. But I agree. We need to find a way to memorialize, what are the pressing issues of today and the things that we feel are important. I feel that our section is missing ways that we can increase Black wealth. And, my concern is for those that are at the bottom. And, I was racking my brain, like, should we recommend, some kind of way that expanded earned income tax credit is put in here so that we really protect that, so that, we're working to increase income for individuals that need it. Should we be looking at the federal poverty guidelines, even though they have been changed recently, but have they been changed enough to really speak to the needs of our communities? So I agree. I think we looked at this from a very high place, but maybe we need to get a little bit closer to this to come up with some real actionable recommendations. And we also talked about in our work group about looking at the credit bureau. That too is not in our final document. So these are working documents, and we still have work to do.
Thank you,
Thank
Commissioner
you very
Blunt-Carter.
much, Commissioner.
Okay, so I know that we are a bit over time. I want to give Commissioner Ingram an opportunity to talk about the Black Genius and Innovation Working Group. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Is this on? Very good. Let me just put on the record. It is freezing in this room. I'm cold. You all not cold? It's freezing in here. All right. I just had to get that off my chest. Secondly, let me just say really quickly, because I have heard the word about the time. My group is fantastic. They were a lot of fun to work with. And as a good teacher told me, if you are the smartest person in your group, find you another group. So I stayed in my group because we had some really smart people who helped put this together. So I'll go really fast here. We were charged, and our co-chair is not here, Stacey Brown Philpott, but I wanted to put on the record that she has been, without question, a very instrumental part of how we came to our final resolute here. We were charged with the next great idea from our young people, from an entrepreneurial concept or aspect, and how we help to unlock what may be trapped from different obstacles that a young person would have. I use young person specifically because we had a deep conversation about who are we talking about? Are we talking about our young babies, our school-age kids who are 0 to 5 or 6? Are we talking about our middle schoolers or our high schoolers or our college-age students, or sometimes the lost prospect of those 25 to 29-year-olds who still have that great idea and that ambition, who just don't know how to, get on to certain things. So we wanted to talk about young people. And so we are talking about 0 to 28, 29 years old, not us folks who are young at heart, but those people who are young in mind, body, and spirit. And so, doing all of that, we came up with a lot of different things. We wrote, we rewrote, we had any number of meetings, we had interviews, and the most important thing that we did was when you talk about entrepreneurship, we wanted to talk to entrepreneurs. We wanted to talk to people who own companies, who are founders, who have made it. We talked to a number of people who have from startup companies to multi-million dollar companies. And we wanted to know what their obstacles were. And so what I will do is save the last thread of what I'll talk about at the end. But I want to quickly just go to the 4 things that we wanted to recommend to President, the administration, and others who would see and hear this report. Number 1, we wanted to improve access to resource. Working with the Department of Commerce, create a network of networks. What we found is that there are a lot of governmental projects. There are a lot of governmental assistance, but how do you find those things? How do our young people find those things? So we thought about having a network of networks, somewhere where there's a one-stop shop where, if we're going to guide a young person to say, hey, here's where you can get federal help, here's where you can get government help, go to this website, go to this office, and they can steer you in whatever direction you're going to go. Because again, we want to commend the Biden administration. There are any number of things that can help a young person at any stage. And that's what we found. But how do we get those things in the hands of teachers? How do we get those things in the hands of mentors? And most importantly, to the young people who are trying to access those things. So that's number 1, having a network of networks. Number 2, to elevate the Black entrepreneurship idea. Think about the governmental PSAs that we've had, public service announcements. We've had public service announcements to say, stop smoking, don't do drugs. What about a PSA, a public service announcement that goes over time, that tells our young people, you can own your own business. You can be the founder of X idea. You can help generate generational wealth. And this is how, and if our government is driving this, we stop people from doing drugs. We stop people from smoking. We charge them a lot more, but we have done all kinds of things from a governmental aspect. And so what we wanted to do was make sure and let the government know that they still have a place in trying to message and educate and inform our young people from a very high level so that they can see it on TikTok, they can see it on streaming, they can see it on TV, that their country, their nation is trying to help drive them into owning and being a founder of. So that's number 2. And I'm skipping a whole lot of stuff here, and I'm just kind of going to the highlights. Number 3, the school programming. You can't talk about entrepreneurship unless you talk about the programming. And this is the union guy talking to you about entrepreneurship, right? Because a lot of times we get trapped into talking about having a good job, and there's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, we should continue to do that. But we should also create more than a chapter in a CTE book about entrepreneurship. Maybe there needs to be a series or years of education for those young people who we see it early. Sometimes we can pick out a kid who's going to be a teacher. You can pick it out because they get their little kids around their friends or their brothers and sisters, and they start, doing things on a little chalkboard, Promethean board, whatever it is, and you can see it. Sometimes you can see the entrepreneurial spirit. That young man from the NAACP, you can see something. Something is there. I got a 25-year-old who's taking the slow road to life, and he's a good kid, and there's nothing wrong with those kids. But sometimes when you see it, you got to be able to identify it and cultivate it and say, hey, come here. Here's where you need to go. Here's what you need to do. And so in our CTE programs, we need to expand the conversation about entrepreneurship. We need to tell these young people from a very early age, own something. We talked about the wealth gap. We talked about trying to bridge that gap. How do you make millionaires? We can start making them in first grade, in second grade, and third grade if we do the right things with our CTE programs. Talk about the good jobs because those are important, and don't diminish that. But also talk about that kid who has that idea, who knows they're going to invent something, who knows they're going to own this Fortune 500 company. 2, dual enrollment programming is very important. Get these young people to go to dual enrollments early so that they can earn an education and earn a living at the same time. And so if you're going to go to school, you can go to school, get your ABCs in the morning, and you can go make your greenbacks in the afternoon. And so you get that practicum and that practical experience while it's on the job training, right? They used to call it OJT when I was in school. Now they call it something else. But this dual enrollment idea of partnering with community businesses and services, hospitals, wherever, a CEO who's going to take and train a young person to do what they're doing in the second part of the day or the early part of the day, and that dual enrollment idea, making that help. And then two, support adult learning. Support adult learning, because our young people between the ages of 21 and 27 are the forgotten kids. And these are sometimes the kids who've done everything we ask them to do. They got a high school diploma. They don't want anything to do with college, but they don't know where to go. And so they start working at the job time jobs. They start working at the part-time jobs. But we can still do things with on-the-job training with our young adults, because that is a critical time in their life where they're trying to find somebody. There's love there. There's, I need this. I want that. Mom's still taking care of me. I don't want that, but I don't know how to get off their payroll. And so do something from a governmental aspect to double down on adult learning, right? And then lastly, expand the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. Through the Department of Labor, have them promote entrepreneurship, period, point blank. Department of Labor, again, we talk about CTE, we talk about trades, and I think that is absolutely critical. This is my credibility, the union guy, saying, I want you to make sure that you get a job, get a good job, get you some benefits, make sure that you can have some things. We believe in all of that. But we also got to believe hand in glove with owning something. You're talking about how do you make a good job better? By having a better boss in many instances, by having a diverse boss, by having a black male or a black female as the person that you can see and who believes in the young people who are coming behind them. And so we believe that we can do that through the federal government. The last thing I'll tell you is this. What we found through all of our interviews is there is still systemic racism that is blocking, that is creating obstacles for people who are doing all of the right things. They're doing everything right. Everything right. And there's a system that won't give loans to a startup business to a young black male, that they can't get the capital, the access to capital to start or continue. Or maybe they've made their first 100,000. How do you get to 250? How do you get to 500,000? And then they get stuck and they get stymied, and then they have to sell their business and go work for a white corporation anyway. And they've done everything right. And sometimes that is in the systemic racism that is built in the fiber of where we are. And we've got to change public policy to deal with that. That is our report, and I just wanted to end there. And I hope that that is a connective tissue between everybody and how we can change the wealth gap and how we can grow, move, and education is still at the cornerstone of this democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Ingram, and thank you to the Black Genius and Innovation Working Group. We are limited on time, but I do want to give you an opportunity to ask questions,
I
respond.
just wanted to add to, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Oh, there's another.
That's right. Okay. We'll move to our post-secondary and career success, a presentation from Commissioner Mitchell, and then we'll close it out with discussion on both working groups. Thank you for flagging.
Thought you were trying to save the best for last.
Of course I
was. Cheers. There you go.
And I can tell you, this was about to turn into a different kind of meeting when Dr. Lawson said that you wanted to eliminate HB.
I see another side
But certainly that connective tissue is there. As a matter of fact, our presentation will be even shorter because you have captured some of the initiatives that we have placed in our report. Not to read it to you all, but I just want to, our paper is arguing the dismantling of the systematic barriers hindering Black Americans in their pursuit of post-secondary education and fulfilling careers that require a multi-pronged approach by making higher education more affordable expanding access to diverse and viable career paths, Commissioner Smith, and promoting equity in K through 12 education, we can create a landscape where Black students are empowered to achieve a success on their own. I will start off by letting you know that this morning at the Capitol in Georgia, seniors from all over the state are meeting. They say one of the barriers to them being able to pass on wealth to succeeding generations is the fact that they have high cost of student loans. There's one young lady, or appropriately, one young lady, senior citizen, who says that she took out $50,000 worth of student loans, and today, with interest and the like, it's up to $300,000 that she has to pay, and she's living on Social Security. I think that if we can deal, since we're talking about loan forgiveness, this will certainly be an infusion of equity into the Black community for sure. Let me just talk about some things that what our group has dealt with. And one of the prongs of higher education that has really been dear to me is incarceration rates, particularly in recidivism. Now listen to this. An ex-offender who completes some high school courses has a recidivism rate of around 55%. Vocational training cuts that rate to approximately 30%. An associate degree drops that rate to 13.7%. A bachelor's degree reduces it to 5.6%. And listen to this, a master's degree brings that recidivism rate to almost 0%. The most expensive housing, particularly Black men in this country, is incarceration. Whereas if we can do something with education, we would definitely benefit our community. I don't know how many of you have heard of the young lady Darnella Frazier. Well, some of you know I'm president of the National Black Caucus of State Legislators. We had an annual conference. We have an annual conference. Matter of fact, Congresswoman Crockett was our legislator of the year when she was a freshman legislator in Texas. But in any event, there was a young lady who took a picture of the incident with George Floyd. Old young lady. The police were yelling at all the bystanders to get away, don't do anything. She was bold enough to take out her camera and ignore the police. Now, had she not done that, not only would you not have known about Darnella Frazier, but you would have never known about George Floyd. Well, many organizations wanted to honor Darnella Frazier. She was a shy young lady. The police were harassing her. She didn't want to come out. I went to school with her lawyer. The Essence wanted to honor her at the Essence Festival. She refused. NAACP, National, wanted to honor her. She didn't come. Went to school with her lawyer, told her, come to the NBCSL National Conference. I want to honor her. Finally, we're able to convince her to come. First time she was on a plane, she said, could you extend my room another day? I've never been to Atlanta. I'd love to be able to look around. I said, here's what you do. Go to Clark Atlanta University and look around at the university. I called up the president and said, Darnella Frazier is coming to your campus. Please welcome her and her mother. On the spot, the president of Clark Atlanta University offered her a full 4-year scholarship.
Praise God.
Today, Darnella Frazier is a sophomore at Clark, and if you talk to her now, she's outgoing. She is just articulate. It's amazing what education can do, and we should strive to give those kind of opportunities, particularly those who cannot afford it. One last thing I'm going to say, this work of this commission is so very important because I'm going to tell you, HBCUs are in jeopardy. They really are in jeopardy. We have some public HBCUs in Georgia, and they are just terribly underfunded because there's a conservative element who says, we can understand you having HBCUs when we didn't let you in our schools. But what is the purpose of having public HBCUs now? And they just underfund them. And so I used to think it was just public HBCUs that were in jeopardy. But I'm telling you, with this attack on affirmative action and DEI, there's a fund called the Fearless Fund in Georgia. These were black women who took private money. Now, they had no government money, no government grant. They raised private money with the goal of supporting black women who wanted to start their own business. Do you know that the conservative crowd took them to court, and the district court said, you can no longer do this because it is race based. And I'm telling you, that is the formula to end all HBCUs, public or private. So the work of this committee is so very important that we've got to go out and make certain that these initiatives are heard and come to pass. I will tell you, I'm co-chair along with Becky Pringle, who's president of the NEA. We have Attorney Baskerville, and of course, we have Dr. Lawson, president of HB. This could have easily have been a quad chair situation. They do such great work, and I'm going to end and ask if they have any other comments they'd like to bring forth.
I don't. I just want to say that your report is rich and it includes a lot of things that absolutely take the report leaps and bounds ahead of where we need to be and bring many things together. So we're grateful. And that's why I think the divisions that we did here and the splintering of the groups are so important, because in the end, we will bring them all together in a harmonious way and we'll have an outstanding report.
You're absolutely right. You know, I would tell you, like many of you, I'm sure we get asked to serve on various boards and so forth, and many of them are, quite frankly, ceremonial. But this was a working group. I got another call from folks about this group here doing this work, and I don't know how they formulated the members of this, but it was really great working with the folks here. And I'm telling you, the policies and some of the discussions we have can truly make a difference.
Great. Thank you so much, Commissioner Mitchell.
I'd just like to add, I've enjoyed the experience and the opportunity to be here, to be a part of a national voice, because we had an opportunity. We did do a lot of work, and so you will see in the record that there are many specific recommendations regarding affordability, regarding expanding career options and how we define success in terms of support systems that should be available from K through 12, looking at the diversity of the talent that is in front of our students, but also when we're talking about when we're expanding post-secondary education and what is happening right now at HBCUs. Clark Atlanta made the news in terms of the numbers of applications that they receive, more than the University of Georgia. I'm experiencing 19.6, 20% enrollment increase, more 3,000 more students, whether it's North Carolina HBCUs, as perhaps a result of what has happened from this landmark decision about access to our predominantly white institutions. We are receiving a resurgence, and so our role is critical. It's just that the funding needs to follow, and we have specific examples about funding mechanisms to support our HBCUs and our PBIs.
Thank you, Dr. Lawson.
Very good. Very good.
All right. So again, short on time, but want to make sure that
I
we've
have one
captured
comment.
the final comments.
I just have one comment.
Okay, we'll go to Commissioner Wiley and then Commissioner Smith.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see your hand. I just want to go back to Commissioner Baskerville's comment. I think there's a real intersection
Put
between.
your mic in closer.
Just bring it closer.
I'm sorry, and I don't speak loudly. I think there's a real intersection between the work that the Black Genius and Innovation Working Group did and what you were talking about in terms of the wealth, building the wealth class. We need to have parallels, systems, operating hand in hand so that we're continuing to advance within the corporate community. So we're in positions of influence in the corporate community that can help those Black entrepreneurs. So I think that we ought to take some time and step back and figure out how we work together. One of the most brilliant pieces, I think, in the Black Genius recommendations is the idea of having this public service campaign that really elevates, and I think that's a bold idea, honestly, that really elevates not only Black entrepreneurs, but Black people that are making a difference. We heard the students say how important that was to him. Even at Harvard Business School, they had to try to develop cases that had Black protagonists so that Black students at Harvard Business School would think about becoming entrepreneurs. So it's at every level that we really need to have these kind of strategies. So I'd hate to see us leave here without really thinking about, because we can't talk about economic advancement if we don't really talk about being able to be in a position to control what goes on in our own community. So.
Thank you, Commissioner
Thank
Wiley.
you so much.
Commissioner Smith.
Yes, I'd just like to make a statement. I was Black Panther. And I switched from Black Panther to Nation Islam. And I switched from that to a Jehovah's Witness. Then I went to the NAACP. The reason why I went to the NAACP, and a lot of people don't know, is that in the ACP and in the HCP, legal defense, along with the ACLU, can sue. We had did more soon in the state of Delaware for poor Black kids, for Black handicapped kids, going after funds and stuff than anybody, most any group. I talked to Chad this morning about the NAACP in Philadelphia. I would tell every one of you guys, the branch take 50 members. They got 16 committees. They got the president and stuff. But each state can sue. Each state can call the legal defense, or they can sue themselves. I would advise this group to have the general counsel of the NAACP come in and talk and see how many lawsuits they done did over the year without people knowing. Our avenue is that our Supreme Court is going to change if the Republicans get back in, but it's going to change for us if the Democrats get back in. And we should take advantage of state courts, Third Circuit courts, and the Supreme Court to keep them in court. Keep them in court. All this is good, but if the fund ain't right and money ain't getting there, and it's racist like everybody's saying, we ain't gonna never get where we need to get till we decide to say, go in the NWSP, which women started, school teachers started, take it over and take the education that each one of y'all got and work these committees and work it to the courts and come back with a win for the community. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Commissioner Smith. Commissioner Johnson.
Two closing points that I had. One, we talked about how we insert the issue of mental health into some of the things we're talking about. And the thing I see most often from a policy standpoint with mental health is we talk about providing services, and that's good. But so many in our communities, that's step two. We don't get to step past step one of getting people to get rid of the stigma associated with mental illness to actually go and get the help. So it doesn't help us a lot if we have all these services out there, but we don't have people comfortable enough to say it's not okay. It's okay to not be okay. You know, most Black churches, you can go to them and say, I've got heart issues and I got this and I got that. And they'll say, we're going to pray for you. Go to the doctor. You go and say, I need to see a counselor. They say, I'll keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on me. And so they don't want to talk about that. So we have to get past that stigma part, and we have to invest in actually there are organizations out there that deal with the stigma issue. And so we have to gear some funding toward some of those folks as well. And then number two, I think one of our first meetings, I raised this issue. I raised it again with Congresswoman Crockett. And basically her answer to me was, we're not doing anything. So I think from this commission, we need a recommendation that specifically says we're recommending that we have a policy issue where we anywhere there is a higher education higher education institution that's receiving federal funding, we ban the opportunity to have legacy admissions. Because if you can tell me that I can't use race as a factor in admitting me, then why should someone get a benefit from their father or someone going to Harvard? Because 100 years ago, my grandfather couldn't go. So now you're giving them a benefit. That is, if that's not racist, I don't know what is. So I think we need a recommendation that says end legacy admissions.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson.
I support that.
And it wasn't 100 years ago.
I was gonna say, it wasn't a vote, y'all. We haven't had the vote yet.
But I mean, where the total ban, thou shalt not come if thou art black.
Yeah.
Your great granddaddy didn't go because he was too stupid. My great granddaddy didn't go because they wouldn't let him in.
So one final comment from Commissioner Nesbitt before we move to the vote.
Just one thing that I haven't heard discussed in great detail, and I just wanted to get on the record, is as we talk about the expansion of the black middle class, let's make sure we leave space for unions in the discussion.
Yes.
Because nothing has been a greater force of creating space for us in the black middle class than unions. And my esteemed colleague, Commissioner Ingram, spoke of himself as a union man. I am as well. But you see, I was the union president. Okay, the union president. And as you can see, protection of making sure employees get a fair wage, proper retirement allocations, proper insurance is all things that unions advocate for. You see in basketball, the group that I work for, record salaries. It's a result of unions making sure that the players get their fair share. You look at another industry where we're overrepresented, the creative arts. How many black musicians, artists have you seen taken advantage of over the years, where we have an industry that sprouted up from the Bronx, hip hop? How many billionaires do we have out of that?
But they have a union now.
Well, it's long overdue if they have it now, right? But I just want to get on record again. Yes, fantastic. But I just want to get on record again the importance of unions in this discussion.
Good job.
Thank you, Commissioner Nesbitt. As a point of personal privilege, if you all are comfortable, I'd like to move the vote until after our panel. Okay, so we'll suspend for now. I'll welcome up our moderator. Oh, we're gonna go to a break. Okay.
Tell you some stories.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. We are going to start our panel discussion for today. And the title of this panel discussion is Black Futures 2038 and Beyond. We have a great panel here. I would like to introduce our speakers. First, we have Lakeisha French, the founder of The Future in Color. Next is Eddie Cohen, president of the Institute for Educational Leadership. Then Dr. Kelly Burton, CEO of Black Innovation Alliance. Dedrin Sneed, founder of Subsume. And Anthony Williams, Urban Capital Network. So let's welcome our guests here. We're just going to jump right in since we are short on time, and I'm I'm ready to hear from you, and I'm sure that other commissioners are as well. Thank you for being here with us. And my first question is for all of you. In what ways can schools address and overcome systemic barriers that disproportionately impact Black students' academic success? In no particular order? Yes, Lakeisha.
Thank you for having me. I would say we could start with investment in research and development. So we have seen lack of R&D investment in our school systems, in our communities. And as we're looking at a tech innovation economy and Industry 4.0, we need to be looking at our innovation deserts within our communities and connect that to our school systems. And so one of the things I would say we need to see is increased investment in R&D, but also not just the training and education, but the application piece, and then connecting also funding to that, giving them the freedom to fail, to be able to innovate and to build and go from consumers to producers.
Thank you, Ms. French. Innovation deserts. I had to write that down. I thought that was good.
So one, thanks for what a great discussion that we got beforehand. Thank you for allowing us to sit in. Just really appreciative. So our organization also houses the Coalition of Community Schools. So we're a big proponent of community schools. This administration has increased the investment fivefold. And if you think about what a community school is, there's a lot of exemplars across the country that schools that have high social capital, great academic outcomes, high social mobility. And we look at really four pillars, right? First is sort of wraparound services, right? If we talked about mental health earlier, right? If you don't attend to the social emotional needs of students, you're not going to have outcomes, right? We're in the middle of a loneliness epidemic. But it's not just the wraparound services, right? It's the social enrichment activities. Things like chess, things like exposure to photography, art, all these things that happen in more affluent schools, right? Thirdly is the family and parent engagement. What many of you may know, we're in the middle of a chronic absenteeism crisis. This is when you have a student that misses more than 10% of their schooling per year. So we're almost at 30% as a nation, right? And the districts that do it well, they have great family and community engagement, right? Sharing power, not just sort of the perfunctory PTO organization, but as we think about the decision-making tree and policies in the school, how do we really integrate parents or caretakers of those students? And then lastly, shared leadership within the school, right? It is critically important when you look at the principals that are high performing, they have the team around them. They're not afraid to fail. They're bold. And when people have this talk about what is a good exemplar education, there are a number of great examples around the country. We just have to invest in those and scale them.
Wonderful. Dr. Burton.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see you all again.
Good afternoon.
I think it's important to nest the education conversation in a broader vision of how we build a great American future. So today at Black Innovation Alliance, we released Declaration 26, which is a counter plan to that other plan that was leaked, to say it's for America's future, and it looks very different than yours. And so a big part of it is thinking about what does it take for us to build that future. It tags to 2026 will be the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So it's to say, if our American project is going to live on another 250 years, how do we build that today? And so I'm happy to dig into it a little bit more, but there are very specific recommendations about everything that you all talked about. So I'm really excited. I have a couple of physical versions of this report with me, but you can also find it online at blackinnovationalliance.com.
Wonderful.
Thank you so very much. I appreciate it. And again, it's a privilege to be here with you all today to speak into the auspice of my current residency with the Ford Foundation as a Ford Global Fellow in Gaming and AI for Education Workforce Development. I think there's two pillars that could be a complement to all that we've heard so far. I think the first thing is that we have to redefine our space for student understanding, because our current Gen Z, but also Gen Alpha, don't think in the same linear space that we think of, right? We're taking physical clocks out of the classrooms because they don't read clocks that way, right? Everything for them is digital. Their world is spatial, and their educational systems are going to be quantum. And so the idea of how these students learn and how they're being addressed simply don't fit in the traditional models for the jobs of the future. And I think the second part is we have to reinvest or have in multitude space that we can address our teachers. Because our teachers now, technology teachers, they're social workers, they're security guards, they're doing everything outside of the basic opportunity to return time to teachers to just teach. And so we have to figure out the new system. And again, it's not going to be linear. The return is not going to be to get a degree. It's not to get a piece of paper, because they're going to be perpetual learners for the rest of their lives as they try to keep pace and have an opportunity to work with technology. So those are my two. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Anthony Williams, thank you all for allowing us to be here. I've enjoyed listening and sitting in on some of the conversation. A lot of great insight. I'll keep mine simple because they've said a lot of great insight. We have to change, I believe, and I'm sitting here as a former collegiate student athlete. We have to change it from academic success and focus, change from athletic success to academic success. We promote athletics so much in elementary, middle school, high school, and even at the collegiate level. We've elevated it to a point where all we want to be is entertainers. We don't want to be innovators. We don't want to be makers anymore. And so we have to shift that focus to academic success as a footstool and as a ladder to closing the wealth gap. Post-secondary education. I mean, we focus now, and I had to stop coaching because you had 10-year-olds, male and female athletes, that their parents were pushing and pressuring them to focus on scholarship. You got to learn the fundamentals. And so I think if there's a basketball gymnasium, if there's a football field on that site, academic site, there should be a Legos program. There should be a robotics program. There should be some type of technological innovation in those schools. The brother just said it. We have teachers and staff that are using technology. They're not chalkboards anymore. They're boards. They're whiteboards that are converting notes. And so we think about this panel, each and every one of us have a pathway to it, but you got to continue to bring us to the table. But shifting the focus from athletic success to academic success. And then we want to talk about closing the wealth gap. Bring some of those professional athletes in here and start talking to them about investing into the community. And I'm not just talking about real estate.
That was a wonderful segue into my next question. So, absolutely wonderful. This commission is charged with making those recommendations. And so I'm going to ask each one of you, your personal recommendation on how do we close the Black wealth gap, eradicate poverty, lower costs for Black families, and expand opportunity. You each have 30 seconds. But that is the question. And pick one, because we had working groups on each one of these. And I'm sure, as you said, you were able to hear some of our discussions about the work that we're committed to. I would like to hear your feedback on the recommendations that we made and maybe some recommendations that we missed that you may have.
So,
or whoever
yeah.
feels comfortable in addressing it right now, you could always come back.
I would say I'll share. I think lived experience is important. So one of my recommendations would be to invest more in people who have lived experience, who are building these solutions. I am one of them. So my story, very quickly, I was born and raised in Jersey City, New Jersey. I grew up in the inner city, but I had a solid middle-class family, and but nonetheless barriers to navigate because of the lack of resources. And so my parents put me in the best resources they had available to offer, magnet programs. I was in a legal magnet program that led me on a pathway to want to help make decisions and fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. I then got into education and started working in after school programs, and I saw the power of being able to be with a student for 3 to 4 hours where you can change the trajectory of their life. Because
a lot of them at home were not getting that type of interaction because their parents had to work, around the clock. So I took that experience, and when I got to college, I realized that nobody was coming to save me. That I was being put out here in a world where no matter how many resources I had or toolbox, that I ultimately had to be the CEO of my life. And I started a program called CEO of My Life, and started it in a church basement in College Park, East Point in Atlanta, after my family had to move from New Jersey to Atlanta to seek more economic opportunity for me and my brothers and sisters. So started that program, and my goal was to help young people to identify what their talent, skills, and interests are and teach them how to turn that into enterprise and self-sufficiency through entrepreneurship, because I saw it as a pathway to liberation, because I worked in the nonprofit sector, worked in the education system from the time I was 17 years old, volunteering to working, and saw all the barriers in the nonprofit space. I worked for Boys and Girls Clubs, YMCA, started up junior achievement programs, and to get a word from the top, from corporate of junior achievement, that you have to cut the program. After I've had students coming into that center building businesses. And so I got really frustrated by those systems and decided to become a social entrepreneur, because I build curriculums in a program experience where I could help the students not only get that toolbox so they wouldn't have to navigate those things, but to be able to iterate, right, and accelerate that. So built a curriculum called Preneurology. And so I'm sharing this because we have built a education to career pipeline. And so having done direct service training, built 2 global social enterprises from that, became an entrepreneurship found me, right? And so I stuck with it and began to realize that I had intellectual property, right? So getting mentors that were telling me, don't run and jump to a nonprofit right away. Protect your IP, because you're putting your lived experience, but go partner with organizations where you can provide these services. And I started going to the SCORE SBA office, right? I was doing that when I was living back home in Newark when they first opened it up in Penn Station. And I would just go and I would walk around, and my mom would just tell me to dream. And so anyway, that the whole pipeline that was built was to be able to give those students those toolboxes. But then I realized that there was not an ecosystem, and so started to become an ecosystem builder and work to help bring those education system, economic development, those pieces. But then realized no matter how much of an ecosystem you put, no matter how much entrepreneurship training, workforce, that if we don't have the policies to sustain investment, new types of investments into education, businesses, but also policies that protect us and give us a recourse to be able to sue when you go to pitch your business idea and you know good and well that you did not get the funding because of who you are, right? And so right now there's no recourse. So ended up launching the Future in Color Institute because we realized this work needed to be institutionalized and that there was large systems change work that needed to happen. And so our fellowship takes those who are creators, entrepreneurs, innovators, helping them to go through those trainings and programming, but also to position them to be able to be in the sectors and industries that are going to shape the future. So we launched something called the Global Black GDP Report, where we are calculating the Black GDP. And so data sovereignty is critical to the future. And so we have this Road to 2050 campaign where we want to not only just throw numbers out to say, let's create 10,000 entrepreneurs. Well, how do we know that that's going to get us to 2050 where we can build upon the numbers, the fact that by 2050, 1 in 4 of every person in the world will be of African descent. By 2050, the largest concentration of young people will be on the continent of Africa. The future is Africa. Melinda Gates was on stage saying this at Clinton Global Initiative a few years ago. And while I thought that was great for her to say that, and she announced an investment into Africa, I thought, well, that's Melinda's future, right? If she's the one that's able to invest. And so how do we get centered in that? And then also in the US by 2045, there'll be a new majority, but the Black community will not be the majority. So when we are not producing at the rate that the demographics are shifting, we have to begin to look so we can calculate and have a precise economic blueprint to be able to work backwards from 2050 to shape economies of the future.
Oh my God, brilliant.
I think that's all that needs to be
Well,
said.
I was
Brilliant. That's Black genius.
I'll be quick because I know our time are limited. We produced a report, co-produced a report with ACM Strategies called the Black Learner Initiative, Level Up, and some sobering news, right? Over the last 10 years, when you look at Blacks in higher ed, that's credentials, there's bachelor degrees, community college, we have 600,000 less Black folk in college. So we celebrate sort of boosting enrollment that are episodic in some HBCUs. We have a crisis in Black enrollment right now. So when we talk about mental health professionals, so one, we have to radically reimagine how do we credential, what are high value credentials, what are multiple pathways to get into professional, to get into different careers in entrepreneurship. I think we need to rethink that. We've done we have a lot of college presidents, provosts. We started our work actually in Atlanta with a lot of the leaders there. You know, Georgia State is one of the only predominantly white universities that have a higher Black graduation rate than white. So there's some learning there. But we talk to the young people and they ain't buying it. They see the radically just awful debt that this generation is and that they're struggling. And so there's a return on investment issue. We looked at maybe the demographics is to explain for the lower enrollment. That wasn't the case. We looked at maybe they're entering the workforce. That also wasn't true. So when we talk about public campaigns, I think we have a real alarmist issue around how do we really meet, to what this brother was saying, what young folks really are interested in, because they're not sort of buying in, getting a lot of debt for the idea of working for someone. So I think if there's a lot of recommendations to support community schools, of course, but really thinking about credentialing and multiple pathways for our young people.
I like that.
I'll add the commissioner to my left. The brother said it. It's PSAs. I mean, we have to start having public service announcements geared, whether it's a video vignette, it's a YouTube. We have to start pushing content to eradicate the vision that we can't make it. And we have to start making excuses. We got some brilliant stories in our community, not just across this table, but amazing stories that people have made it. It's our story. It's our history. Think about where we came from the last 400, 600, 800 years. We have to start telling the story ourselves. But it's PSAs, and I don't think you thought about how powerful that commission said it. But we have to start public service announcing our successes in our community so that we can see it. And we see it we see the highlights. We're gonna see it during the Olympics. We see all of those great stories. But think about when we start telling our individual, and it doesn't need to be in a book. Everybody don't need to rewrite a book because they're not reading that many books. If you're writing a book, everybody's not reading. Let me just tell you. But if you send it in public service announcement, you put it in videos, you start putting it in gaming content, you start putting it in animation content, you start connecting it to the GDP, and you start showing that, hey, you can make six figures now, and we can reverse psychology, the black job comment, and say, oh, here's some black jobs. You want to tell me you can make $100,000 a year as a plumber, as an electrician? Yeah, we can change that real quick. And so that's my thoughts. PSAs, stop making excuses, stop accepting excuses, and start accepting excellence and start showing our community excellence.
And we understand that in the context of elections, right, with Russian interference, right?
Right.
But, you know, we're talking about AI and how we can use this to our advantage to sort of reprogram and unlearn a lot of the unhealthy things that we've had over time.
And to the PS.
And I just want to jump in real quick. To your point about artificial intelligence, I would say if AI and emerging technology is not woven all up and through those recommendations, they are already dated. And so it's really important. A lot of what we tackle in Declaration 26 is we need to own the future economy. Because if we do not own it, China will, Russia will, India will, Brazil will, and we will be behind the eight ball. So much of what we need to figure out is how do we ensure that our folks don't miss out on yet another industrial revolution? How do we get in on the ground floor? And one of my frustrations, even with this conversation around housing, is we still think about housing as a vehicle for wealth creation. Housing is no longer a vehicle for wealth creation unless you are already wealthy. When you're talking about the average home price is $380,000, you already have to be wealthy.
Yes.
So if you purchased a home in 1983, yes, that is a means of wealth creation. Today, no, it is not. So we need to think about what is the ground floor of the market today, and how do we get our folks on the ground floor of that market so that in 20 years, our kids can be millionaires and billionaires because they got it on the ground floor. Second thing that I will say is being race explicit is DOA.
Mm-hmm.
We know this. What is the best proxy for race? Place. Because of segregation. Oh, that is the legacy and the history of this country. So a lot of what you're going to see is policy recommendations that are rewired around place. The majority of Black people live in cities in the South. 90% of Black people live in cities or the South and or. If we can get resources targeted to the cities, the top 10 major cities, 6 of them are run by Black people, right? So let's think about how we can create proxies for race that allow us to achieve the outcomes that we intend without telegraphing to everyone who it's for.
Love that.
Thank
Love
you.
it.
No, a fantastic segue. And thinking of some of these components, and again, I think there's a lot of answers in this room, but I think my preface would be that when we're thinking about it from a policy standpoint, whether we're talking about AI or we're talking about housing or health care, that we have to understand that the system that we're all speaking to today is not something that is broken, but it's something that's operating as designed. So we're thinking from an engineering standpoint, this system is built to systematically oppress, misalign, and unfortunately oppress a certain amount of people for a certain amount of time. And so what we have to look at is how do we innovate and build infrastructure? Because frankly, that's been the Black and the African experience, is to use our innovation not only for survival, but for thriving and through resilience to really bring on a prosperity for our people. And so what we need to be thinking about is what are these innovative systems that we have access to now that haven't been, we'll say, colonized, in the sense that we still have access and alignment that our Black genius can take advantage. I haven't heard anyone say the premise of crypto yet. And so the idea, if we have to think that both presidential candidates have to have a crypto plan that's being brought to them by this community that is decentralized, is geopolitically diverse, that is part of this future. And we have to understand, how do we use this system both from a financial but also from a technological standpoint of blockchain technology, of how do we build this to have that data sovereignty, because that's the currency of the future, is data. And so the way that this system also has been oppressed to us, we have to understand as Black Americans that because we have not been included in this data system, that the data that we're creating right now, that's vibranium, because these systems don't know how to operate on something they've never seen. And so while we're building these new AI systems that are built and are regressing because they have limited data sets, they have traditional sets. The new set of data that we're creating right now is what's going to navigate the future. So we have to understand from a technological standpoint, how do we use this Black genius, not just as a system, but as a wealth and revenue and equity generating service.
I know that the commission has questions that they would like to ask. So I'm going to ask one final question. And it's about the future. What are the top 3 things that you envision the future looks like for Black Americans as it relates to advancing educational and economic opportunities? What are the top 3 things? And you can just say them as bullets if you want to, that you envision the future looks like for Black Americans as it relates to economic and educational opportunities.
I would say healthy. I think the correlation between health and wealth is critical. Although Black women are the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs, we are also losing healthcare at the fastest rate. We are also facing maternal health care issues. And so I think more, the healthier we are, the longer we could be around, right? Because we talk about wealth creation and access to capital. Well, you have to be here and you have to be healthy, and entrepreneurship and innovation and an autonomous economy that it's taxing. So you put that on top of the existing health disparities. And so I think that correlation between wealth is health. And so one thing that I understand that our counterparts know how to do really well is to be healthy, wellness, right? And so that's one thing. The second thing I would say is getting ahead of emerging technology. We need to learn how to be ahead. The pandemic sped up, technology and AI 10 times faster. but we're talking about AI, but folks are onto quantum, like Dedra mentioned, right? So how do we get ahead of that curve and put that into the school systems and education and partner with non-traditional educational support systems that are outside? There's so many barriers to that in the school system. I've experienced it myself when they're corporate leaders or folks who are working on vocational studies and training and building curriculums. And so you have to go through so much bureaucracy just to get to the kids, right? So how can we get them ahead? So for the future, I would see a future where there's more connectivity, where school systems are built as a part of the innovation and entrepreneurial ecosystem, as opposed to these separate dismantled pieces that are meeting up together, having 2 to 3 conversations and then 3. So I would see a connected Black global economic ecosystem, because I also think we need to harness the assets in the global Black diaspora, even from an educational perspective. As we talk about environmental and sustainability, there's students that are experiencing things similar to what our kids living in neighborhoods that don't have access to clean water and things of that nature. So they need to be building solutions together. So let's use technology as a way to break down those barriers. That should be happening in the school systems.
And that was 3. Thank you very much.
So I'll jump in really quickly. In the Declaration 26 report, we assert that we have the right to innovate. We've been so busy fighting for our civil rights that we don't have the spaciousness to innovate. So we declare we have the right to innovate, and we offer up a bill of innovator rights at the end of the report, because sometimes you just have to remind yourself, like, doggone it, we got the right to innovate too. When you think about what do those rights look like, we have the right to access to capital. 96% of risk capital, venture capital, goes to white men, not the white community. 96% goes to white men. Less than 1% goes to Black people, 2% goes to women, and 1% goes to other people of color. So how are we supposed to be able to scale big ideas if we don't have any access to risk capital, right? So when we think about like systemic racism, there are probably few places where it's more just overwhelming than in Silicon Valley. So, when I think about kind of what we want that future to look like, part of it is just declaring that we belong here and that we deserve the same opportunity as everyone else.
If not, I can open it up to the floor.
We're just 3 real quick things. Again, a lot of fantastic things are said. I would say one is that we'll have to continue to innovate because the systems that are already in play and in place are still set to oppress. And so that will be even more skillful and adept at ideally addressing those, but that's in building the skills of those digital economies. I think the second thing is that I hope there's a return to in-home elder care and being able to build long-term multifaceted Black families. I think we don't do a good job when we think of the future of thinking of our seasoned citizens, where I think a lot of us grew up with multimodal families, and where we are in the present and where that may happen in the future. We're seeing a misalignment of that. So I think when we're talking about innovation, I think there's a human element of that we have to try to restore to be able to just simply survive. And then I think in that third sense is understanding where we are in the space of data. Because I think that as we're talking about humanity, the way that we look at ourselves as Black Americans, as humans, is going to change significantly in the next 20 to 30 years as we get technological implants, as we move across local and global spaces. What we define ourselves as is just going to become more and more diverse. And so we have to have that as an understanding from a cultural standpoint, who is with us and where the opportunities align. Thank you.
I'll keep it simple. We've got to find a way to connect education, entrepreneurship, and community investment. We've got to find ways to have community building capital. We look at people that take moonshots like Uber, but there's several millionaires that invested in Uber for $5,000 that made $24 million. So we have to start thinking that $5,000 doesn't matter. $1,000 invested in a company doesn't matter. We have to start thinking about it because the bank will tell you Give me $1,000 to open up the depository account, and they're gonna 10x it, and they're gonna lend it back out. But we have to start understanding how the system works. But I think to summarize is connecting education with entrepreneurship and community investment in our people, and it doesn't take a lot. The state of Georgia did something wonderful and amazing. I'm trying to push it to get into Texas and other states where they allow unaccredited investors to invest up to $10,000 on an annual basis into companies, but the company has to file and register. That's a huge start. $10,000 can help a lot of small businesses and some startups. It doesn't take $1 million.
Wonderful. Thank you all. I believe, I believe Commissioner Nesbitt had something he wanted to share.
Good afternoon. You guys are fascinating. I wish we had more time to let you all just wax on. So some of the ideas you have are in the future. I want to talk about something in the past, 1865, reparations that we never got. What do we do with that idea in this modern economy? You said place, not race, right? So that means reparations is dead? Yes, no? I love the thoughts of the panelists on this one.
That's a tough one.
How many of y'all have been to Tulsa, Black Wall Street? I suggest you go. You go because in Tulsa they have a placard that showed all the businesses that were destroyed that had insurance policies that had never been paid. These were bona fide human beings that had businesses, paid policies that filed a claim and they didn't pay it. At some point, it's my belief, we got to stop asking and just start figuring out how we work without this system, around the system. I mean, I love the idea, but we got to figure out that if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. If it doesn't, let's work as if it's not going to happen. We've made enough money. I believe we've made enough money as an economy that if we started keeping our money in our own communities, in our own businesses, reparations wouldn't even be an issue. Not saying we don't need it and not do it, because we had our ancestors that built this country for free, a lot of it. But I'll look at that every time I go to Tulsa, and I'll be there tomorrow. I'll go by and think about all those businesses that never got the insurance claims paid. They had businesses registered and they had insurance policies. So I'm saying if we can quantify it, great. But we've seen what just happened in California.
Yes. I wouldn't say reparations is dead. I would say that we need to reimagine what reparations looks like. I think that we so often stay in the historic piece of it to go back and get what we didn't have. There are opportunities, and I believe it's through data is just one piece, right? Data alone won't do it, but I think there's data, narrative shifting, and quite frankly, getting in early in industries. One of the things we started doing and why we chose the Black GDP, and we call it GDPX, is because we are, to Kelly's point, when we say we can't talk about, equity and continue to talk race-based, right? So let's remove it. So I think, again, thinking about this, so I can just give you a real example. Our index is called the Global GDPX index, right? And so when we say X, we mean all of those X factors that have not been accounted for in the economic calculation, right? When you think about the health of a country, multicultural communities that have not been counted in, that have been historically excluded, starting with the global Black community, even just here in the US. So when we think about that, we begin to quantify and calculate both historic contributions. We did a report called the Green Project that was funded by the Kauffman Foundation 4 years ago as a seed to this project. And we realized it wasn't enough to quantify historic economic contributions across sectors and industries historically, but to also level set where we are currently, and then to look at what are the sectors and industries and regions that will lead by 2050, right? What are those current projections? And then begin to look at where those gaps are and to fill those in, right? But then we also begin to understand through the data the correlation between where we have contributed significantly as a Black community in this case, and where are we not, right, in these growing sectors and industries. So I think a more precise, data-driven, data sovereignty-driven approach to begin to count in those communities that have not been counted. When people say, well, why do you start with the global Black GDPX report? Well, because when we think about proximity to opportunity, right? We are the furthest away from opportunity, and the future is an opportunity. So I think looking at this from a different lens, and creating a blueprint. And so that's why we said the road to 2050. And so we have to get folks, these economic drivers are our entrepreneurs, our educators, innovators. But we also don't know that entrepreneurship is the only solution, right? So we have to sort of stop using just the talking points and begin to look at what is actually working and put things on the ground. And we don't have to stay caught in the reparations conversation, but instead, what is the truth and the reality?
I think one of the panelists had a.
But just very quickly, I would love to see just a direct investment in our historically black colleges and universities. I think if we were to take all of the historic data, of who from black, Latin, Asian, white, what have you, that have attended those universities, and simply make them free, and from there make the loans or any type of programs that went through that, make them not impact your financial opportunity for credit, for home ownership, and then to have them be direct spaces for research and development, because that's also an opportunity at HBCUs. We have brilliant researchers that don't have access to federal funds for research, and so they go and they have to partner with PWI universities for the research that they're leading. And so I think being able to have that, just again for infrastructure. When I think reparations at this space, it has to be infrastructure, because I think looking at from a financial context, it may be too large of a sum for us to see that in our lifetime. But investing directly in education and building that infrastructure that can at least give us a port in the storm, I think would be something I'd love to see.
For the interest of time, we only have time for 2 questions, and I believe it was Dr. Lawson.
It's not so much a question, just a comment.
Well, I would like to collapse your question and Dr. Cade's question, and then the panel can respond to both so that we have time.
Well, along with Commissioner Nesbitt said, I just want to offer, sometimes the calculus is not as simple as counting the number of Blacks that are in leadership or mayors in a city. Because I'm from the state of Mississippi. And when opportunities are made available, sometimes the governors in those states will reject the funding and all of the resources that will come in to impact healthcare, many different arenas. And so I just want to make sure that we're clear that sometimes it's not just the calculus of numbers of people in mayoral positions or in leadership positions, because there's a whole nother system on top of that.
100%, which is why our recommendations are that there are federal block grants deployed directly to cities, not funneled through states, exactly for that purpose.
And thank you for that clarification. We need to add that to the.
So I
Dr.
guess
Cate?
first and foremost, as I sit here and listen to this panel, I think I'm inspired and I feel more hopeful about the future of our country and really advancing educational equity and excellence and economic opportunities for Black Americans. So I want to thank the panelists for their very forward-thinking, innovative perspectives. And I'm just sitting here thinking about our first presentation, and I remember Dr. Burton speaking about tech innovators and that being the new track to building Black wealth in our nation. And no longer is the concept of home ownership really the gateway. And so I just want to hear more about that piece in terms of, and I think you all sort of have kind of laid it out. I think the GDPX Global Report and Declaration 2026. And so really, I just want to say I'm inspired. Never lose your momentum to get your voices out and to share your knowledge. I am truly, truly inspired by each of you. That's it.
And lastly, Commissioner Baskerville.
Yes, thank you very much. And I don't have a question, just a point of information. First, to all the panelists, your presentations and the information that you imparted is tremendously helpful. It's incredible. Thank you so much for being here. Mr. Williams, on the question about Tulsa, you'd be pleased to know that under this administration, the Department of Agriculture is now funding a nationwide effort to identify those persons whose property were taken and those whose insurance policies were never paid. They have Black and brown people, people of all backgrounds and languages going, natives going and finding these people. It's called the heirs project. And there's a gentleman, Mr. Wilbur Peer, I can't think of his name of his company, but he seems to be a lead on that. And I'd like to connect you and anybody else who's interested in that, because they need more people to fan out. And they're working primarily now through the 8 historically Black faith denominations, 33,000 churches. But so I'll share that and we can exchange information. Dr. Burton, I would love to talk more with you about race, place as a substitute for race. We litigated that for about 20 years, coming out of the first affirmative action cases in Texas, in Georgia, and in California. It didn't work, and I'd love to learn more about how you're doing it, what AI might add to it. What did work somewhat was socioeconomics strata. And the reason it didn't work is because we couldn't get Congress or the states to make the places small enough. So if they looked at cities or even counties, it could have been a reasonable substitute, but they want the money to go to the states. They would not go directly to places where you have Black mayors or Hispanics and so forth. But I'd love to have a conversation about that. I'm intrigued, and I learned so much from all of you. Thank you so much for being here.
Why don't we give the panel a round of applause while Dr. Courtney approaches. Thank you. We've been sitting here for a minute. Okay. While Dr. Courtney goes to the podium to prepare us for the vote, I just wanted to thank our panel so much for your brilliance and your candor. And then I'll also say to commissioners, we will be following up. We have your contact information because there are certainly a lot of items that you raised that we would like to explore further. So we'll work through our working groups and make sure that we make those connections. So I just wanted to assure everyone that we will schedule and figure out ways to continue this. However, as we have said all day, in the interest of time, I'm going to turn the program over to Dr. Courtney so that we can do, so that we can vote in reference to our policy papers, and then we will close it out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Executive Director Holmes. So very quickly, 2 orders of business. One is the vote to officially accept the policy papers. As you know, the papers were constructed as individual subgroup working group papers. So per OGC, there must be a vote to declare that this can be one full commission paper that is published online upon completion. What's the first second?
Do you need to move in a second?
Second.
Okay, it is moved.
Second.
He needs to know
Who moved?
Billy Mitchell. Representative Billy Mitchell from Georgia.
Second.
May I have a second?
Commissioner Lassiter, second.
It's moved and seconded that this commission will accept the working group policy papers as a full commission report that is published online at its completion. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay.
The ayes have it.
The ayes have it. Perfect. All right, moving to next steps just quite quickly. The
I'm
goal.
so sorry. Well, generally, when you do that, though, there's a vote, a yes, and then some discussion. And I just had a very brief question.
Yes, please.
Are you saying as the papers currently are, or with at least
said
the
with
amendments that we heard today?
Upon completion with the amendment.
That would include all the things. Okay, thank you. Didn't register. It's too fast for me, sister. Thank you.
I was trying to be expedient here, but thank you for slowing me down because this isn't quite important that there's a consensus on this. As you all know, the goal of today is to use the information, the discussions, our expert panelists and the nudges that you all provided to one another to inform the next iteration of these policy papers and recommendations. We have a relatively short timeline. So what we are requesting is that if you have any additional recommendations or edits, that you get them to us by September 22nd, at which time we will compile them. I know there's a lot of notes on your paper. If you want to just leave your papers here, we will compile the written feedback. We also want to encourage you not to share these draft copies. They are privileged and confidential and not for distribution. Okay, that being said, thank you so much.
Should we get additional suggestions to Director Holmes, or there's another address you want us to email feedback to?
Yes, the full team is great. And so we'll follow up via email, all of these directions and just next steps. But we thank you for your time and your commitment to this process of evolving these policy papers and recommendations.
And on that note, meeting is adjourned.
We thank you for this tremendous work and leadership and support of all of the Department of Ed team and for all the colleagues. Thank you. And the presenters.
I'd like to ask you a question.